Lower your sword, set it gently against the stone wall, pull your cloak a little tighter, and settle in close to the fire, because tonight we are going somewhere that most travelers never bother to look. Not into the dungeons, not into the keep. We are going into the deep, slow, breathing lore underneath Skyrim. The stuff that hides in the margins of ancient texts, in the ash piles of collapsed civilizations, in the hollow eyes of a creature that was once a prince among elves. There are 160 facts waiting for you here. Some of them will change the way you look at the entire game. Some of them will make you feel something heavy and quiet. A few of them will pull at that part of your brain that genuinely cannot stop wondering what happened to an entire race of people in a single instant. So, take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. The world outside can wait. We start at the very beginning. Section 1. The ancient world before Skyrim. Stars, gods, and the first lie. Before there were Nords, before there were dragons, before there was even a sun in the sky, there was something simpler. Two forces, two currents, Anu and Padome, light and shadow, stasis and change. In the cosmology of the Elder Scrolls, these two primal states brushed against each other in the void, and out of that contact, reality began to form. Not with a bang, not with a grand declaration, more like the slow spreading of frost across a window pane in the middle of the night. Fact 1. From the interplay of Anu and Padome came the It'ada, the original spirits. These were the raw ancestors of both gods and Daedra, existing before concepts like time or matter had any firm shape at all. Some of these spirits would go on to become the 8 divines. Others became the Daedric princes. The distinction between them was made in a single choice, and we will get to that choice very soon. Fact 2. Among the It'ada, a spirit called Lorcan conceived an idea that most of the others found either brilliant or horrifying, depending on how generous you are feeling. He proposed that they build something new, a mortal realm, a place called Mundus. He convinced many of his fellow spirits to donate portions of their divine power to shape this plane, and they did. What Lorcan failed to make entirely clear was that in doing so, they would permanently diminish themselves. Pouring their essence into creation would reduce them from beings of pure spirit to something partially constrained, partially mortal. The Aedra gave up some of themselves to build the world, and they could never get that back. Fact 3. The Aedra, those spirits who participated in the creation of Mundus, are in many ways weaker than the Daedra because of this sacrifice. The Daedra declined to participate. They kept their power intact and used it instead to build their own private realms, the various planes of oblivion. This is why Daedric princes can manifest in the mortal world with relative ease, while the gods of the divine pantheon can only act in subtle, indirect ways. The Aedra bled themselves into the fabric of reality. The Daedra did no such thing. Fact 4. When the Aedra discovered what Lorcan had done, what the full cost of creation truly was, they tore out his heart and threw it down into the world he had tricked them into making. Lorcan's heart fell to Nirn and became buried deep beneath Red Mountain in Morrowind. This is not just myth. The heart of Lorcan is a physical artifact that would eventually drive entire civilizations to ruin. We will spend a great deal of time with it later. Fact 5. The two moons that drift across Skyrim's night sky, Massur and Secunda, are not moons in any conventional sense. In Nordic cosmology, as well as in broader Tamrielic theology, they are believed to be the rotting body of Lorcan, split in two after his heart was removed. Massur is the larger of the two, reddish in tone, roughly analogous to how Mars looks from Earth. Secunda is smaller and paler. Every night you look up at those moons, you are looking at the corpse of the god who built the world. That detail is genuinely not discussed enough. Fact 6. The stars are not stars. This is perhaps the most quietly unsettling fact in all of Elder Scrolls cosmology. When Magnus, the architect of the mortal realm, realized what creation was costing him in terms of divine power, he decided to leave. He tore a hole through the fabric of reality and fled to Aetherius, the realm of pure magic beyond oblivion. That tear is what we see in the sky every day. The sun is the hole Magnus made when he escaped. It is a wound in the world, and the stars scattered across the night sky are smaller holes made by the lesser spirits called the Magna Ge, who followed Magnus in his retreat. Every single point of light you see above Skyrim is a puncture in the membrane of existence, and through each one, magic bleeds into mundus. Magica itself flows through those holes. The stars are not distant burning spheres. They are the exit wounds of gods who ran away. Fact 7. Because the Aedra diminished themselves so profoundly during the creation of mundus, and because some of them became so enmeshed in the fabric of reality that they literally became the laws of physics, the 9 divines cannot interact with the mortal plane in any direct dramatic way. Talos is a partial exception to this, and the theological implications of that exception are at the heart of the entire conflict between the Empire and the Thalmor. But most of the divines exist as a kind of ambient blessing woven into the structure of reality itself, rather than as beings capable of walking up to you and having a conversation. Fact 8. The Daedric princes, by contrast, never lost that power. They created their own realms of oblivion using their intact divine essence, and those realms are extensions of themselves. Hermaeus Mora's Apocrypha is not just a place he rules, it is made of him. Mehrunes Dagon's Deadlands are not a realm he inhabits, they are his nature expressed as landscape. Sheogorath's Shivering Isles are not a territory he controls, they are what madness looks like when it has enough room to stretch out. This is why Daedric princes cannot truly be killed. Destroying their physical manifestation is like cutting off a finger. They simply reform in their own realm, because the realm and the prince are the same thing. Fact 9. There is a concept in Elder Scrolls cosmology called a kalpa. Think of it as a cosmic cycle. The universe as we know it is not the first version of itself. Before our current world, there was a previous age, a previous cycle of creation and destruction, and before that another one, going back indefinitely. Alduin, the World Eater, exists specifically to consume reality at the end of each kalpa so that a new one can begin. He is not evil in a conventional sense. He is more like a natural force, the equivalent of entropy given a draconic body. His rebellion against his cosmic role, his decision to instead simply dominate and subjugate mortals rather than fulfilling his function, is what makes him a villain. He was supposed to eat the world, not rule it. Fact 10. At the very beginning of recorded time, before linear history had truly taken hold, there was an era called the Dawn Era where time moved differently. Events could unhappen, causes could follow effects, gods walked directly in the mortal world. The formation of Mundus did not happen in a straightforward sequence, but rather in something closer to a dream, where multiple contradictory things could all be simultaneously true. This is why ancient Nordic myths and elven creation stories about the same events can completely contradict each other and both be considered accurate within the Elder Scrolls framework. The Dawn Era was not subject to consistent causality. Reality was still being decided. Fact 11. The concept of linear time only became fixed and stable because of Akatosh. The dragon god of time established the flow of cause and effect, anchoring reality into a sequence that mortals could actually inhabit and understand. This is why Akatosh is arguably the most important of all the divines. Without the god of time, there is no history. There is no before or after. Everything just exists simultaneously in a kind of formless eternal moment. Akatosh gave the universe a direction, and in doing so, made mortal existence possible in any coherent sense. Fact 12. Alduin is not Akatosh. This is one of the most common theological errors in Nordic culture, and the game's script addresses it obliquely. Nords have a tendency to conflate the two because both are ancient, draconic in nature, and associated with time. But Alduin describes himself as the firstborn of Akatosh, meaning he is a creation or an aspect of the time deity rather than the deity itself. Ancient texts from the Dragon Cult era make this distinction carefully. Alduin possesses unique characteristics that set him apart from his dragon siblings, specifically his role as World Ender, the being whose function is to close out each kalpa. When he abandoned that function to pursue dominion over mortals, he committed a kind of cosmic dereliction of duty that had nothing to do with Akatosh's role as the god of time itself. Fact 13. The Nordic understanding of the divines diverges significantly from imperial theology. Where imperials worship 8 or 9 divines in a relatively unified pantheon, ancient Nords built their spiritual world around dragons and a set of nature spirits they called the Skalls. The assimilation of Nordic religion into the imperial framework happened gradually over thousands of years of political and cultural integration. And what modern Nords call their religious traditions is in many ways a hybrid that would be unrecognizable to the Nords who first crossed over from Atmora with Ysgramor. Some of that original spiritual understanding survives only in the most isolated communities. Fact 14. Nirn itself, the planet on which all Elder Scrolls games take place, was shaped by forces so powerful that its geography and physical laws are not entirely consistent or stable. Places where great magic was performed in the distant past can behave differently from the surrounding landscape. The Throat of the World, which we will discuss at considerable length later in this script, is one such place. The nature of reality in Skyrim has been permanently altered by events that happen thousands of years before the player character ever arrives. Fact 15. In the belief systems of most Tamrielic cultures, mortal souls do not simply cease to exist at death. They travel to a specific afterlife determined by their nature and their deeds. Nords who die in honorable combat aspire to Sovngarde, a misty heroic realm where the great mead hall of Shor waits. Shor, interestingly, is the Nordic name for Lorcan, the god who's tricked the others into building the world. The fact that the Nord conception of paradise is a place presided over by the god who deceived his fellow deities and had his heart ripped out as punishment is one of those beautiful, strange details that makes Elder Scrolls religion feel genuinely layered. Wherever you are right now, whatever time it is, wherever you have settled in tonight, drop a comment and let me know. Tell me the time and the place, even just the country or the city. And if you are finding this useful for sleep, please subscribe. It genuinely means the world, and it helps this channel reach more people who need a quiet corner at the end of the day. Section 2. The Dwemer, builders of an impossible civilization. They are gone now, every single one of them, but the evidence of what they were capable of remains scattered across Skyrim like the aftermath of a particularly organized god. Spinning gears still turn in chambers no one has entered for 3,000 years. Steam still hisses through pipes that have never once failed. Mechanical spiders still patrol hallways where their creators dissolved into nothing during a battle in the First Era. The Dwemer, the Deep Folk, the people the Nords called dwarves despite the fact that they were actually elves of normal height and considerable intellectual sophistication, represent one of the most haunting mysteries in all of Tamriel. Fact 16. The name Dwemer translates roughly to people of the deep. This refers not to physical shortness, but to their philosophical orientation. They were deep thinkers, people who believed that reason, logic, and empirical inquiry were the highest possible values. They rejected the worship of the Aedra and the Daedra entirely, viewing religious devotion as a kind of intellectual failure. The Dwemer did not pray. They engineered solutions to every problem, including the problem of mortality, including the problem of divine power, and ultimately including the problem of existence itself. Fact 17. The Dwemer had an entire professional class dedicated entirely to the manipulation of sound. These were the tonal architects, and their work was not music in any performance sense. It was engineering. The Dwemer had discovered that existence itself operates on principles of resonance, that matter, reality, and even the minds of other beings can be altered, shaped, and controlled through the application of precise frequencies. They used tonal forces in mining, breaking stone with sound rather than tools. They used it in medicine, treating illness through therapeutic vibration. They used it in construction, building structures with acoustic properties that would self-sustain indefinitely. And according to ancient Chimeri scholarship, they used it in psychology, bending weaker minds to their will through a form of complex oral hypnosis. Fact 18. The Dwemer built enormous devices called tonal resonators, complex architectural wonders that stood taller than the largest giants and filled cavernous underground chambers with pipes, dials, and pistons. When activated, these resonators released sequences of powerful tones capable of altering the brainwaves of anyone nearby, inducing states ranging from deep calm and profound pleasure to paranoia and absolute terror. The uses for such a device are, as one ancient text put it, virtually limitless. These machines still exist in some of the deeper Dwemer ruins, though few travelers survive long enough to notice them. Fact 19. Kagranak was the chief tonal architect of the Dwemer and arguably the most brilliant and most dangerous engineer who has ever lived in Tamriel. When Dwemer miners drilling beneath Red Mountain in Morrowind discovered the heart of Lorkhan, a literal physical remnant of the god whose body became the world, Kagrenac saw an opportunity. He designed 3 unique tools, Wraithguard, Sunder, and Keening, specifically for the purpose of interfacing with the heart and drawing out its divine power. His goal was not personal gain in any petty sense. He wanted to elevate the entire Dwemer race to something beyond mortality. He wanted to make his people gods through pure engineering. Fact 20. The book Kagrenac wrote to explain this ambition, known as divine metaphysics, treats divinity as a technical problem to be solved, rather than a mystical state to be earned or granted. It is a cold, precise document that lays out the theoretical framework for creating gods through manipulating the fundamental structures of existence. The Chimere, the ancestors of the Dunmer who shared Morrowind with the Dwemer, considered this document to be not just intellectually wrong, but spiritually obscene. To them, the heart of Lorkhan was sacred. Kagrenac's plan to use it as a power source was the equivalent of strip mining a god for fuel. Fact 21. At the Battle of Red Mountain in the year 1 Era 700, Kagrenac struck the heart of Lorkhan with his tools in the middle of active combat with the Chimere forces. And in that instant, every single Dwemer in all of Tamriel vanished simultaneously. They did not flee. They did not transform slowly. They did not die in any way that left recoverable remains. One moment they were there, and the next they simply were not. The machinery kept running. The food on their plates was still warm. Their weapons and armor sat exactly where they had been dropped or set down, next to small piles of ash that might or might not have been their bodies. Fact 22. Years after the battle, when researchers first entered the previously sealed Dwemer ruins of Bamzamshend and Mournhold, they found those ash piles. Not everywhere, but in chairs, in beds, in the middle of what looked like mid-conversation groupings. The picture that emerges is of a civilization in the middle of living its ordinary life, erased in a fraction of a second. Whether Kagrenac succeeded in transforming his people into something divine and unknowable, whether they were scattered across time, whether they were simply destroyed, remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in all of Tamrielic history. Todd Howard himself has stated that he has no intention of ever answering it. Some doors are better left closed. Fact 23. One Dwemer survived, just one, and his survival was entirely accidental. Yagrum Bagarin was a Dwemer master craftsman who was traveling in an outer realm, some far and strange plane of existence, when whatever happened at Red Mountain happened. He returned to find himself the last of his kind. He appears in Morrowind as a diseased, bloated figure living in a Telvanni wizard's tower, afflicted with corpus disease and unable to die, neither alive nor dead in any clean sense. He is the only person alive who knew the Dwemer from the inside, and the full weight of being the sole survivor of an entire civilization sits on him in every line of his dialogue. Fact 24. The Dwemer ruins of Kagrenzel, located in the mountains east of Riften, have a name that directly translates to Music City in the Dwemer language. This is not a coincidence. Kagrenzel appears at first glance to be a mostly empty ruin, with a single glowing orb in its main chamber. Activating that orb triggers a trap that drops the player into a long fall through a spectacular cavern system. But embedded in the walls of that cavern, glimpsed only briefly during the fall, if you know to look for them, are massive skeletal remains far larger than mammoths, enormous rib cages pressed into the stone. According to lore and apocryphal Nordic texts, these may be the bones of snow whales, creatures that flew through the highest peaks of Skyrim in the ancient Merethic era, singing in magical tones. The Dwemer may have been studying them, capturing them, attempting to reverse engineer their sonic properties for use in tonal architecture experiments. Fact 25. The snow whales are mentioned in several lore documents as creatures that inhabited Skyrim's mountain peaks, and their relationship to the Dwemer's interest in tonal manipulation is left deliberately ambiguous. What is clear is that the Dwemer were drawn to anything that used sound to interface with reality. Dragons breathe power through vocalization. Snow whales apparently sang in ways that had physical effects on the world. The Thu'um works on exactly the same principle. The Dwemer were trying to understand and ultimately reproduce the fundamental mechanism by which reality can be rewritten through sound. Fact 26. Blackreach. If there is a single location in Skyrim that embodies the full scope of what the Dwemer built, It is Blackreach. Officially called Faljardum Din in the Dwemer language, this is a city-sized underground cavern located beneath the mountains of northern Skyrim, accessible through several Dwemer ruins including Mazincha Left, Raldbthar, and Alftand. It should not be able to exist. The cavern is so large that it has its own ecosystem, its own light sources in the form of enormous glowing mushrooms and a false sun hanging at its center, and its own ruins of Dwemer architecture stretching as far as the eye can see. It connects multiple major Dwemer settlements and served as a highway between them. The Falmer who scattered into the depths after the Dwemer's disappearance have partially claimed it, but even they do not understand the full scope of what lies in its deepest reaches. Fact 27. The dragon Volthuriol lives in Blackreach. This is remarkable for multiple reasons. Dragons are creatures of the open sky. They were created by Alduin and share his inherent orientation toward height, toward open air, toward the freedom of great distances. A dragon living underground is deeply strange. Volthuriol can be summoned by using the unrelenting force shout on the large glowing orb at the center of Blackreach, and he has apparently been down there since before the Dwemer disappeared. How he ended up there, whether he was imprisoned, whether he chose it, whether something about Blackreach itself contains him, is never explained. He has been beneath the earth for at minimum 3,000 years, which is a profound and slightly unsettling kind of loneliness. Fact 28. The Dwemer machines still work. 3,000 years of zero maintenance, zero power supply in any conventional sense, zero personnel to adjust or repair them, and the Centurions still patrol, the spheres still roll out of their alcoves when triggered. The spiders still click and skitter through chambers that have been sealed since the First Era. This is not explained by any kind of magic that modern Tamrielic scholars understand. The best working theory is that Dwemer engineering represents a synthesis of sound manipulation and mechanical design so advanced that the devices are essentially self-sustaining through the same tonal principles that built them. The resonant frequencies built into their structure keep them operational indefinitely. They are not just machines, they are machines that learn the fundamental frequency of their own continued existence. Fact 29. The Ethereum Wars represent one of the less discussed but genuinely fascinating chapters of Dwemer history in Skyrim specifically. Dwemer miners in Skyrim discovered deposits of Ethereum in the deepest parts of their excavations, a rare crystalline mineral with unique magical properties that exists nowhere else. King Thames, one of the major Dwemer clanholds in what is now the Reach, led the research program to develop technology to harness it. The resulting Ethereum Forge produced artifacts of such immense power that the Dwemer alliance shattered. The four Dwemer city-states of Skyrim, who had cooperated reasonably well up to that point, went to war with each other over control of the Forge. After decades of fighting that weakened them all, Nordic armies moved in and pushed the Dwemer back significantly. The Ethereum Forge itself was eventually lost and not rediscovered until the Fourth Era player character pieces together its location through 4 scattered shards. Fact 30. The Lexicon, the strange Dwemer cube that the hermit Septimus Cygnus has dedicated his life to studying in his lonely outpost north of Winterhold, does not merely store information. It transfers it directly into the minds of those who interact with it. Completing the quest related to it and transcribing the lexicon grants a permanent perk called Ancient Knowledge, which improves smithing ability and provides an armor bonus when wearing Dwemer equipment. This represents actual fragments of Dwemer engineering knowledge being absorbed from the device and integrated into the player's understanding. The Dwemer had achieved data transfer far beyond anything involving books or oral tradition. They could copy expertise directly into a person's neural pathways, bypassing years of training entirely. If this technology had survived intact and been properly understood, it would have completely transformed education throughout Tamriel. Fact 31. A researcher at the College of Winterhold named Arniel Gain conducted what he believed would be a controlled experiment to understand the Dwemer's disappearance. He obtained keening, one of Kagranak's original tools, and used a soul gem instead of the actual heart of Lorcan to attempt a scaled-down recreation of the ritual. The result was immediate and identical to the original. Arniel vanished instantly, without a trace, without explanation. His experiment provided proof that Kagranak's use of those tools directly caused the disappearance. It also meant Arniel suffered the same fate. His shade occasionally appears in the game to assist the player, suggesting he exists in some strange state that is neither death nor life, which may be precisely what happened to all the Dwemer. Not gone, just somewhere else or somewhen else, in a state that the mortal world no longer has language for. Section 3. The Snow Elves, the Falmer, and the Oldest Betrayal. There is a tragedy buried so deep in Skyrim's history that most players walk directly over it without realizing what lies beneath their feet. Every time you fight a Falmer, those pale, blind, hissing creatures that swarm out of Dwemer ruins and underground passages, you are fighting what remains of a civilization that rivaled anything in Tamriel's ancient world. The Snow Elves were not always the Falmer. They were not always degraded and feral and stripped of every remnant of culture. They were once a sophisticated people with extraordinary architecture, a rich spiritual tradition, and a society complex enough to produce individual heroes, scholars, and scholars of spiritual practice. What happened to them is one of the most sustained acts of institutional cruelty in the game's entire history. Fact 32. The Snow Elves, or as the Falmer before their fall were known to themselves, were a race of Mer who inhabited Skyrim before the arrival of humans from Atmora. They were tall and pale, white-haired and frost-resistant, with a deep religious devotion to Ori-El, the elven ancestor god who was their equivalent of Akatosh. They built the Chantry of Ori-El hidden in the Forgotten Vale of western Skyrim, a place of such architectural beauty that even 3,000 or 4,000 years of neglect and isolation cannot entirely conceal what it once was. Their society supported pilgrimage as a spiritual practice, and the most devoted among them undertook long journeys through the Vale, visiting way shrines dedicated to their god, in the hope of achieving a deeper form of enlightenment. Fact 33. The Night of Tears is the event that destroyed this civilization. When the first humans crossed from Atmora and established settlements in Skyrim, the earliest of which was a place called Sarthal, relations with the Snow Elves were strained, but not immediately violent. Then the Snow Elves attacked Sarthal in the night and massacred virtually everyone there. Ysgramor and his 2 sons escaped back to Atdora. The attack has always been framed in Nordic history as an act of unprovoked racial hatred. But the truth, revealed through lore documents found in the College of Winterhold quest line, is more complicated. Beneath Sarthal lies the Eye of Magnus, an artifact of immense and poorly understood power that predates the current world. The Snow Elves knew it was there. They could not allow humans to possess it. Their attack was a targeted strike to reclaim or neutralize that artifact, and the civilian massacre was the collateral damage of a magical arms race, rather than simple genocide. Fact 34. This does not excuse the Night of Tears. Nothing excuses the Night of Tears, but it does change the moral shape of everything that followed. Because Ysgramor returned from Atmora with his 500 companions, and the campaign he led against the Snow Elves was explicit and total extermination. He did not return to negotiate. He did not return to reclaim Sarthal. He returned to ensure that no Snow Elf civilization survived, and he came very close to succeeding. The Companions, the legendary organization, began as a genocide force. Their founding purpose was the complete elimination of another people. This is not the kind of fact the Companions' modern reputation tends to advertise. Fact 35. The surviving Snow Elves, desperate for protection after their kingdom collapsed under Ysgramor's assault, went to the only other civilization in Skyrim with the power to shelter them: the Dwemer. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Dwemer agreed to provide sanctuary, but their price was total submission. The Snow Elves who accepted the Dwemer's offer were made to eat a specific toxic fungus that permanently blinded every single one of them. This was not an accident or a side effect. It was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty, designed to make the Snow Elves completely dependent on their new masters, unable to navigate independently, unable to resist, unable to flee. The poison was so thorough that it did not merely blind the individuals who consumed it, it altered their biology in a way that passed on to every subsequent generation. All descendants were born blind. Fact 36. Over countless generations underground, cut off from sunlight and sky, forced into labor and subjugation, the Falmer changed, not just their sight, which was gone, but their entire physical and cognitive form. They grew pale beyond paleness, almost translucent. their features elongated and sharpened into something different from the elegant snow elves they had been. Whatever it was, the Dwemer fed them, and how they treated them over millennia reshaped not just their culture, but their fundamental biology. By the Fourth Era, what remains of the snow elves as Falmer are creatures that are barely recognizable as the race they once were. They are blind and violent, and have lost nearly every trace of language, architecture, or spiritual practice. They are what happens when a civilization is systematically destroyed from the inside out over thousands of years. Fact 37. Not all snow elves took the Dwemer's offer. A small number retreated instead to the Chantry of Auriel in the Forgotten Vale and went into isolation there, protected by their faith and by the remoteness of the location. One of these, Knight Paladin Gelibor, can be found there in the Dawnguard DLC, still alive, still maintaining his post, still waiting. He has been alone in the Chantry for somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 years. His brother Arch-Curate Verther became infected with vampirism by another snow elf and eventually turned against everything Gelibor stood for. The Falmer who survived underground eventually found the Chantry and slaughtered everyone there, leaving Gelibor completely alone. He does not know what the outside world looks like anymore. He does not know how much time has passed. He has simply been keeping his faith for millennia in a frozen valley that the rest of the world forgot existed. Fact 38. The Forgotten Vale itself is one of the most visually beautiful locations in the game, and that beauty serves a purpose beyond aesthetics. The Vale was the center of Snow Elf religious life. It contains the only surviving examples of their architecture in all of Tamriel. Seeing it intact, with its frozen waterfalls and ice formations and graceful ruined structures, creates a direct emotional contrast with the Falmer you have been fighting everywhere else in the game. Those creatures were built in places that looked like this. The beauty of the Vale is the tragedy of the Falmer made visible. This is what was lost. This is the world that systematic cruelty erased. Fact 39. Gelibor mentions something quietly devastating during his conversations with the player. He says that the Falmer have been growing more intelligent again, slowly. Over generations, they are beginning to regain something. He hopes, with what must be a staggering amount of patience built from thousands of years of waiting, that they might one day be reachable again, that a line of communication might be established, that they might eventually return to something like their former selves. This hope, coming from the last surviving member of the civilization that the Falmer once were, is one of the most understated and genuinely moving details in the entire game. Fact 40. The Eye of Magnus that the Snow Elves wanted so desperately to prevent humans from possessing is genuinely unlike any other artifact in the game. No one who encounters it in the College of Winterhold questline is able to categorize it or understand where it came from. Some scholars believe it is a remnant from a previous Kalpa, a fragment of a universe that ended before the current one began. Others believe it is a tear in reality, a direct access point to raw, creative power, without the mediation of any individual deity. The Psijic Order, who are the oldest magical organization in Tamriel, and who we will discuss at length shortly, considers the eye dangerous enough that it needs to be removed from mortal access entirely. Not studied, not stored carefully, removed. That level of caution from an organization that has been dealing with reality-threatening magical situations for longer than most civilizations have existed says everything about what the Eye actually is. Fact 41. Sarthal, the first human city in Skyrim, was actually built around the Eye of Magnus. Whether the first Atmarans who settled there knew what lay beneath is not entirely clear, but the ancient Nordic tombs and chambers that the College of Winterhold quest takes you through suggest that Sarthal was deliberately constructed to conceal and possibly contain the Eye. The Snow Elves' attack was not a response to human expansion. It was an intervention to prevent a power source of world-altering potential from falling into the hands of a people who had no idea what they were sitting on top of. Fact 42. The War of the Crag, a conflict between the Falmer and the Dwemer within Blackreach and other underground spaces, began after the Falmer eventually organized enough resistance to push back against their enslavers. Given that the Dwemer then vanished in the First Era, this rebellion may have been ongoing or recently concluded when the disappearance happened. The Falmer were fighting their way toward freedom when their captors simply ceased to exist. In one reading of events, the Falmer won, but by that point they had been so thoroughly changed by their generations of captivity that winning changed very little about their circumstances. Section 4. Dragon Lore, the Thu'um, and the Age of Fire. No creature in Skyrim is more central to the game's mythology than the dragons, and yet most of what the average playthrough reveals about them is just the surface. There is so much more beneath the wings and the fire breath. The theology of dragonkind is one of the most elaborate and genuinely thought-out systems of belief in any video game, and it is worth sitting with in detail. Fact 43. The Thu'um, the voice, the dragon language, is not a language in any ordinary sense. Dovazul, as it is properly called, is not a system of symbols that represents ideas. It is the fundamental code of reality itself. When a dragon speaks, they are not describing concepts, they are actualizing them. The word for fire in Dovazul is not a label applied to fire. The word is the fire, made manifest through draconic utterance. A dragon does not say a word and then separately produce a flame. The word and the flame are the same event. The vocalization and the physical reality are identical. This is why the Thu'um is so extraordinarily powerful in the hands of mortals. Humans are not doing something like what dragons do. They are doing the exact same thing, which should be physically impossible for beings whose vocal cords were not built for it. Fact 44. The dragon language was created entirely from scratch by the development team at Bethesda, guided initially only by Todd Howard's request that it look and sound like something a dragon could physically carve with its claws. The team started from that single constraint and built a functional language around it. The angular, claw-appropriate visual style of the script was determined first, and then the phonetic system and vocabulary were developed to match. The result is a language that looks exactly like what it is supposed to be, marks made by something with blades at the end of its fingers, and it sounds the way it looks. Harsh, guttural, physically demanding to pronounce, and yet rhythmically consistent enough to be genuinely chanted. Fact 45. Every word wall in Skyrim marks a location of historical significance in the Dragon War. These are not random placements. The ancient Nords who carved the words into stone were making monuments to specific confrontations, specific victories, specific moments where mortals proved they could stand against draconic supremacy. When you approach a word wall and a dragon rises nearby to defend it, that dragon is not a coincidence. It is a guardian, placed there or drawn there because of the wall's significance. Each word wall is both a record and a battleground, simultaneously past and present. Fact 46. The Greybeards at High Hrothgar maintain near total silence, not because they are elderly, or slow, or disconnected from the world. They maintain silence because speaking casually in Dovazul would reshape reality around them uncontrollably. Even a greeting in the dragon tongue carries enough power to cause avalanches, shatter stone, or harm bystanders through unintended sonic force. When Arngeir speaks English to the player character, it is a deliberate accommodation, a downgrade of his communication method, specifically to avoid accidentally injuring the person he is trying to talk to. The Greybeards communicating through gestures and the most restrained possible use of the voice is not weakness. It is the discipline of people who have transcended the need to prove what they can do and instead dedicate all their energy to proving what they choose not to do. Fact 47. When the Greybeards summoned the Dragonborn to High Hrothgar by shouting their name, the force was audible and physically felt across all of Skyrim. Guards across the entire province comment on it. Characters in every major city have reactions. This represents the Greybeards using a tiny, carefully measured fraction of their capability in the most restrained possible shout they could manage, and it shook the entire province. A whisper from people who speak in whispers echoed through mountains and across plains like an earthquake. The demonstration was not accidental. They were showing exactly what mastery of the Thu'um looks like when combined with absolute discipline. Overwhelming force applied with perfect precision for a completely mundane purpose. Fact 48. Paarthurnax is the most morally complex character in the game, and the question of whether to kill him is one of the most genuinely difficult ethical dilemmas Bethesda ever embedded in a game. He was once Alduin's second-in-command during the Dragon War. He helped oppress and subjugate mortals for a very long time. He then defected, taught humans the Thu'um, and betrayed Alduin's cause in a way that gave humanity the philosophical and practical tools to resist draconic dominion. He has spent thousands of years at the throat of the world since then, meditating, practicing the way of the voice, fighting his own nature daily. The Blades, specifically Delphine, demand his execution on the grounds that he is a dragon, and therefore dangerous by nature, regardless of his deeds. The Greybeards consider this a demand for racial murder, judging a being for what it is rather than for what it has done. Neither position is simply wrong. Fact. 49. Paarthurnax's philosophical position on his own nature is one of the most quietly profound things any character in Skyrim says. He acknowledges openly that the instinct to dominate is part of what he is at a fundamental level. He does not claim to have cured himself of it or transcended it. He says instead that he fights it every single day, that thousands of years of conscious effort have not eliminated the impulse but have allowed him to master it. This is not the rhetoric of someone who has made peace with themselves. This is the rhetoric of someone who has chosen to make being good more difficult than being evil, and chooses it anyway, every day, indefinitely. His thousands of years of restraint on that mountain represent a moral achievement that no combat victory can match. Fact 50. Jurgen Windcaller founded the Greybeards after a defeat changed everything. After the Dragon War, the Nords used the Thu'um freely as a weapon. It was standard military practice. Entire armies shouted in battle, turning engagements into reality-warping chaos. Then came the Battle of Red Mountain, where Nordic tongues suffered a catastrophic defeat, despite their mastery of the voice. Jurgen Windcaller, one of the greatest tongues of his era, spent years in meditation trying to understand why their power had failed them. He concluded that treating reality-altering ability as a casual weapon was a desecration of the gift. He developed the way of the voice, a philosophy that treats the Thu'um as meant for worship and philosophical exploration rather than warfare, and founded the institution that would become the Greybeards. His teachings transformed a culture where shouting down your enemies was considered normal into one where doing so was considered spiritually reckless. Fact 51. The dragon priests were not always the emaciated undead horrors guarding ancient tombs. In Atmora, before the migration to Skyrim, the dragon cult operated as something closer to a legitimate religious institution. Dragon priests were respected intermediaries who maintained relationships between dragons and humans. The arrangement was genuinely mutual. Dragons provided magical knowledge and protection. Humans provided tribute and worship. This was not slavery. It was closer to feudalism, and in its early form, it offered real benefits to both parties. Fact 52. Something changed when the dragon cult arrived in Tamriel. The historical record is not entirely clear on the mechanism, but the prevailing interpretation among modern scholars is that Alduin's increasing corruption, combined with the power dynamics of a new and unfamiliar continent, transformed the dragon priests from intermediaries into enforcers. They began demanding increasingly extreme sacrifices. They imposed cruel and arbitrary laws on the human populations they oversaw. The relationship curdled from mutual benefit into a system of terror. The rebellion that became the Dragon War was not a rejection of the original compact between dragons and humans. It was a rejection of what that compact had become under Alduin's influence. Fact 53. The 8 highest-ranking dragon priests each served a specific dragon rather than Alduin collectively. Their relationship was more like a feudal bond than a religious hierarchy. Each priest's mask was enchanted by their particular dragon patron, reflecting that dragon's individual personality and domain. This is why no 2 dragon priest masks have the same enchantment. Morokay's mask enhances magicka regeneration. Nachgreen's affects magicka and destruction. Otar's covers fire, frost, and shock resistance. These are not standardized equipment distributed to a hierarchy. They are personalized gifts, reflecting individual relationships between specific priests and specific dragons that developed over decades or centuries of service. Fact 54. The dragon priests convened at Bromjunar, which we now call Labyrinthian, to settle disputes between draconic territories. This location served as the administrative capital of the dragon cult's entire theocracy, the place where the most powerful priests would gather to arbitrate conflicts and manage Skyrim's division into dragon territories. The maze-like structure that gives it its modern name was once the seat of an empire. Its complexity, which today reads as an elaborate dungeon, was once the architecture of governance. When the Dragon War ended and the cult was broken, Bromjunar's importance evaporated completely. What was the center of world power became just another ruin, its meaning stripped away along with everything that made it significant. Fact 55. Alduin's ability to resurrect dragons appears to be unique to him. No other dragon in the game demonstrates this power, suggesting it is tied directly to his role as firstborn of Akatosh or to his specific cosmic function as the World Eater. Every dragon burial mound the player encounters in the world represents a dragon that Alduin has been systematically reviving from death, building his army back up from the scattered graves of the Dragon War. When you absorb a dragon's soul, you are not just gaining power, you are permanently removing that specific dragon from Alduin's ability to reconstitute it. The main quest is not simply about killing Alduin, it is about destroying his army one soul at a time before he can fully rebuild it. Fact 56. The Dovahkiin, Dragonborn, is not a unique phenomenon in Elder Scrolls history. The power has manifested at multiple critical junctures throughout Tamrielic history. The first recorded Dragonborn was Alessia, a slave woman who led a rebellion against elven masters in the First Era, liberating humanity and establishing the first human empire. The 8 divines blessed her with dragon blood, allowing her to absorb souls and speak with the voice. Upon her death, she was elevated to sainthood in the imperial religious pantheon. Her legacy proves that being Dragonborn is not random. It is divine intervention at historically critical moments, the appearance of someone with the specific capability needed to address a specific existential threat to civilization. Section 5. The Companions, Ysgramor, and the Oldest Brotherhood. There is a building in Whiterun that looks like an upturned boat. The roof curves in exactly the way a ship's hull would curve if someone had flipped it over and decided to live under it. Most players assume this is a design choice, a stylistic decision by Bethesda to make the Companions' headquarters look distinctive. It is not a design choice. It is actual history, and understanding that history changes everything about what the Companions represent. Fact 57. Jorvaskr, the mead hall at the heart of Whiterun's Wind District, where the Companions have made their home for thousands of years, is an actual ship. When Ysgramor and his 500 companions crossed the sea from Atmora to Skyrim, they arrived on vessels. One of those vessels, or something approximating it according to various lore interpretations, was dragged inland from the coast and eventually built around. The upturned hull became the roof. The ship became the building. Jorvaskr is not shaped like a boat for aesthetic reasons. It is a boat. The Companions live and train and hold their ceremonies inside a vessel that carried some of the first humans to arrive in Skyrim, and that vessel has been sitting in the middle of Whiterun for somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 years. Fact 58. The Companions as an organization predate Skyrim itself. They originated in Atmora, the frozen continent to the north, long before humans migrated south across the sea. When Ysgramor and his companions made that crossing after the Night of Tears, they did not found a new organization. They brought an existing one with them. The traditions, the oaths, the structure of the institution, all of it predates the concept of Nordic culture as we know it. The Companions are arguably the oldest continuously operating organization in all of Tamriel, with traditions and obligations that predate written history, predating even the founding of the first human settlements on the Tamrielic mainland. Fact 59. The lycanthropy that afflicts the Circle, the inner group of companions who hold the beast blood, did not originate with the companions themselves. It was granted to them by the Daedric prince Hircine, the Lord of the Hunt, as a pact that gave them increased combat power in exchange for their souls going to his hunting grounds after death, rather than to Sovngarde. The current members of the Circle who carry the beast blood are living with the consequences of a deal their predecessors made, possibly without full understanding of what was being traded. Kodlak Whitemane, the harbinger of the Companions at the time of the main quest line, deeply resents his lycanthropy because of this. The beast blood prevents Nordic warriors from entering Sovngarde after death. For a man who has spent his life in honorable service to the ideals his culture holds most sacred, being barred from the afterlife those ideals are supposed to earn is a spiritual wound that nothing in the physical world can heal. Fact 60. Kodlak dedicated his later years to researching a way to cleanse his soul of the lycanthropy before death. His entire character arc, quiet and sad in the way that genuinely wise characters in fiction often are, is about a man trying to ensure that a lifetime of honorable work is not erased by a deal he did not personally make. When you complete the companion's quest line and attend his funeral, you are not just honoring a fallen warrior. You are participating in the act of saving his soul from an afterlife he did not choose and did not deserve. Fact 61. Ayla the Huntress, unlike Kodlak, has no interest in a cure. She is proud of her lycanthropy and considers it a gift. She will never seek to cleanse the beast blood and says so explicitly if asked. This is not presented as a moral failing. It is a different value system within the same warrior culture. Some people prioritize honor and traditional beliefs about an afterlife. Others prioritize combat power and personal pride in what they are. The game does not declare either position correct, which is one of the things that makes the companion's questline richer than it might initially appear. Fact 62. The Silver Hand faction that serves as the primary antagonists of the companion's questline are not simply monster hunters. Their fixation on the companion specifically stems from generations of genuine knowledge that the circle carries the beast blood. They are not wrong that some companions are werewolves. They are wrong to kill all companions indiscriminately, regardless of whether they are circle members or not. But their intelligence is accurate. What makes them villains is not their goal, killing werewolves, but their methods and their total lack of moral discrimination. Fact 63. The 500 companions themselves are one of the most significant military forces in all of Tamrielic history, not because of their individual numbers, but because of what they accomplished. Each one was a legendary warrior in their own right. Nordic saga recorded the names and deeds of all 500 of them individually. They did not simply conquer Skyrim through superior numbers. They fought the Snow Elves at a time when Snow Elf civilization was still relatively intact and formidable, and they systematically dismantled it. The modern companions, for all their skill and tradition, exist in the shadow of what that original group was. The current institution maintains traditions and recites oaths whose full original context has been largely lost to time, like a church that still performs the liturgy but has forgotten which god it was originally written for. Section 6. The Dark Brotherhood, Sithis, and the Void. There is something unusual about the Dark Brotherhood that distinguishes it from every other faction in the game. The companions worship martial excellence. The College of Winterhold worships knowledge. The Thieves Guild worships, in its peculiar way, the principle of cleverness applied to acquiring things that belong to others. But the Dark Brotherhood worships nothing that has a face or a name or a realm you could visit. They worship the void itself. Fact 64. Sithis is not a Daedric prince. This is the mistake most people make when first engaging with Dark Brotherhood theology, because Daedra are the most obvious category of supernatural being in the Elder Scrolls. But Sithis predates the Daedra. Sithis predates creation. Sithis is the concept of change, entropy, and eventual ending that existed as a primal force before anything else had formed. In the cosmological framework of Tamriel, Sithis is the nothingness before Anu began its process of organizing reality. Sithis is not a being with preferences and personality in the way the Daedric princes are. Sithis is more like a principle, a cosmic truth, the inevitability of ending that underlies all existence. The Brotherhood does not pray to a patron. They pray to oblivion itself. Fact 65. The Night Mother is the intermediary between the Brotherhood and Sithis. According to the founding myth of the Dark Brotherhood, she was once a nameless woman with 5 children who was contacted by Sithis with a terrible offer: kill your children and become his bride and the progenitor of a new form of worship. She accepted. She killed all 5 of her children, and in doing so, provided the spiritual foundation for the entire institution of the Dark Brotherhood. Her mummified body still holds some form of consciousness, communicating with listeners, simultaneously dead and active. Whether the story is literal or mythological, whether Sithis actually made an offer, or whether this is a narrative construct built around a real woman's real crimes, is left deliberately ambiguous. The horror works either way. Fact 66. The Black Sacrament is how people contact the Brotherhood, and the ritual's requirements are not arbitrary. Creating an effigy of the intended victim from specific materials, stabbing it with a specific type of knife, chanting a specific incantation. These elements only produce results when performed by someone with genuine, consuming intent. Random performance of the ritual produces nothing. This functions as a self-selecting mechanism. Only people truly committed to arranging a murder go through the effort and symbolism of performing the Black Sacrament correctly. It ensures the Brotherhood does not receive casual requests, does not receive law enforcement traps, and does not waste resources on clients who might change their minds. The ritual filters for the truly desperate and the truly resolute. Fact 67. Aventus Aretino, the young boy in Windhelm, who successfully performs the Black Sacrament to summon the Brotherhood against Grelod the Kind, the orphanage's abusive headmistress, represents a very specific kind of narrative horror. He is a child. He has been driven to summon assassins because the adults responsible for protecting him and the other orphans have completely and systematically failed to do so. Grelod is genuinely monstrous. She beats the children in her care. She denies them food. She tells them repeatedly that no one will ever adopt them. Aventus escaped, broke into his family home, stole his dead mother's remains, performed a forbidden ritual, and spent weeks alone chanting in the dark, hoping that someone would come kill his tormentor. When you arrive, you are witnessing the result of institutional failure so complete that a child decided murder was his only option. Killing Grelod may be morally difficult in the abstract. In context, it is more complicated than that. Fact 68. Cicero, the eccentric jester who serves as the Night Mother's keeper, is not simply comic relief. He is the last surviving member of the Dark Brotherhood's pre-collapse generation. He served in Cyrodiil as the Brotherhood was falling apart, watching members die or abandon the cause one by one over years. For a significant period, he was alone with only the Night Mother's corpse for company, maintaining rituals and traditions with no other living practitioners, continuing to perform ceremonies for an institution that had effectively ceased to exist. His journals, which you can find scattered throughout his travels, trace the transformation from a normal, capable assassin to someone broken by years of absolute isolation and unrelenting duty. He is not mad in the way someone is mad because something is wrong with their brain. He is mad in the way someone is mad because they held faith alone for far too long with no one around to anchor them in ordinary reality. Fact 69. The 5 tenets of the Dark Brotherhood are not suggestions. Breaking any one of them means execution by the rest of the organization without trial or appeal. The tenets prohibit stealing from fellow Brotherhood members, harming fellow members, betraying the organization to outside parties, disobeying orders from superiors, and refusing contracts. When Astrid, the leader of the Skyrim Sanctuary, breaks the tenets by betraying the Brotherhood to the Empire during the main quest line, she triggers the near-complete destruction of everything she claimed to value. The organization survives for centuries under constant pressure from authorities precisely because of internal discipline maintained by these absolute rules. When leaders themselves violate the tenets, the entire architecture of trust collapses, and the Empire's response is swift and thorough. Fact 70. The Morag Tong, the assassination organization in Morrowind, predates the Dark Brotherhood, and was the organization from which the Brotherhood eventually split. The Morag Tong operates legally within Dunmeri society, performing religiously sanctioned killings under a framework of writs and religious authority granted by the tribunal. The Dark Brotherhood broke away from this structure centuries ago, rejecting legal frameworks entirely and embracing direct service to Sithis without the intermediation of any state or religious institution. The two organizations use similar methods and both involve themselves with death as a kind of sacred practice, but their philosophical orientations are essentially opposite. The Morag Tong believes in structured, lawful death. The Brotherhood believes death is chaotic and inevitable, and that service to this principle needs no legal justification from any mortal institution. Section 7. Daedric Princes and the Nature of Oblivion. 16 realms beyond the mortal world. 16 personalities vast enough to contain entire dimensions. 16 sets of desires, agendas, and philosophies that have been operating on timescales mortals cannot really comprehend. The Daedric Princes are one of the most richly developed aspects of Elder Scrolls lore, and the game's representations of them barely scratch the surface of what they actually are. Fact 71. The Daedric Princes are the survivors of creation. When Lorcan proposed building Mundus and asked the Itada to contribute their divine substance, some of them refused. They watched the Aedra diminish themselves to build the world and decided that was not a trade they were willing to make. Instead, They use their intact power to build their own realms of oblivion from their own essence. Each realm is an extension of its prince's nature. They are not rulers of their realms in the way a king rules a kingdom. They are their realms. The boundaries between a Daedric prince and their plane of oblivion are conceptually meaningless. Fact 72. Hermaeus Mora, the Prince of Knowledge and Fate, is arguably the most dangerous of the Daedric princes, despite having no sphere remotely related to physical power. He collects all knowledge, every secret, every technique, every text ever written, and many that have not been written yet. His realm, Apocrypha, is an endless library in which every conceivable written work exists somewhere, including texts about things that have not yet happened. Hermaeus Mora himself claims to be one of the oldest princes, born from the discarded ideas of creation, and describes himself as the first secret whispered at the dawn of the world. He seduces scholars and mages not through threats or dramatic power displays, but through the simplest possible offer: more knowledge. By the time his targets realize the depth of their entanglement, they are already his. Fact 73. The Black Books, those disturbing tomes connected to Hermaeus Mora that appear in the Dragonborn DLC, grant genuine power to those who read them. But reading them binds the reader to Mora's service and creates a dependency. The knowledge does not come free. It comes with implicit understanding that the one who gave it can take it back, can call in the debt, can draw the reader deeper into Apocrypha. The Dragonborn faces this directly in their confrontations with Miraak, who has been in Apocrypha for thousands of years, studying under Mora and becoming essentially his most prized and imprisoned student. Fact 74. Miraak was the first Dragonborn. Not the first in the historical sequence, since Alessia predates him in recorded history, but the first person to possess the power and be explicitly identified as such within the dragon cult structure. He was a dragon priest who came to understand what he was, and Hermaeus Mora seduced him with promises of forbidden knowledge that his dragon overlords would never willingly share. He began conspiring against the dragons using the knowledge Mora provided. Another priest, Vachlok, discovered the betrayal, and the two fought a battle so catastrophic in its magical scope that it literally tore Solstheim away from the Skyrim mainland, creating the strait that now separates them. Vachlok won. Miraak was imprisoned in Apocrypha, where he remained for thousands of years, growing in power, waiting for another Dragonborn to appear. Fact 75. Meridia is unique among the Daedric princes in that she was not originally Daedra at all. She was one of the Magna Gae, the group of spirits who followed Magnus in fleeing the creation of Mundus through holes torn in reality. However, unlike the others who fled entirely, Meridia became fascinated with mortals and chose to remain involved in the world despite the ongoing cost to her power. Other deities considered this aberrant, and she was eventually cast out, becoming neither truly Aedra nor traditionally Daedra. Her hatred of undeath stems from this origin. She was once associated with life and light, and she sees necromancy and vampirism as fundamental violations of the natural order she helped create and still cares about. This makes her one of the few Daedric princes who seems to genuinely care about mortals' welfare, though her methods of expressing this care can be as ruthless as any other prince's. Fact 76. Molag Bal, the Prince of Domination and Enslavement, created vampirism. Not as a disease, not as a side effect of some magical experiment, but as a deliberate act. The origin of vampirism in Elder Scrolls lore involves Molag Bal's violation of a mortal woman and the corruption that resulted from that act, creating the first vampire. The nature of the curse, transforming humans into predators who feed on their own kind while struggling with the humanity they have lost, reflects its creator's essential nature: domination of the self, enslavement to hunger, violation of the natural order. Every vampire in Skyrim is, in theological terms, both a victim and an extension of Molag Bal's original crime. Fact 77. Not all vampires are the same in Skyrim. Sanguinare vampiris is the most common strain in the province, but pure-blood vampires like Serana carry ancient bloodlines that trace back much closer to the original corruption, granting them abilities that common vampirism does not. The Volkihar clan, Lord Harkon's bloodline, represents this pure-blood strain taken to its aristocratic extreme. They are the vampire equivalent of royalty. maintaining Gothic courts and pursuing multi-generational political goals from their fortress on an island in the Sea of Ghosts. Regional variations in vampirism also exist across Tamriel, because different Daedric princes have subsequently altered the condition for their own purposes. The disease has diversified over millennia into something closer to a family of related conditions than a single consistent affliction. Fact 78. The Wabbajack is philosophically perfect as an artifact of Sheogorath. It does not represent madness in the way that most artifacts represent their prince's sphere, which is usually as a straightforward enhancement of whatever quality that sphere governs. The Wabbajack is madness. You genuinely cannot predict what it will do. It might transform an enemy into a sweet roll. It might summon hostile Dremora. It might cast lightning. It might turn a target into a pile of coins. It might spawn random creatures. No two uses guarantee the same result. This makes it simultaneously one of the most potentially powerful weapons in the game, and one of the least tactically reliable. That exact combination, enormous power paired with complete unpredictability, is precisely what makes it perfect. It cannot be systematized. It actively resists strategic use. Using it means accepting outcomes you cannot anticipate and cannot control, which is the only honest relationship anyone can have with madness. Fact 79. The ebony blade does not simply absorb life force from any kills. It grows stronger specifically when used to kill people who trust the wielder. Friends, followers, spouses, companions. These are the victims that feed the blade's power. Mephala, the Prince of Lies, Secrets, and Plots, designed her artifact to require active betrayal to reach full potential. The blade rewards deception specifically. Players who want to fully power it must choose to murder NPCs who believe themselves safe in the player's company. This is not just a mechanical quirk. It is a moral test, a DLC tier character assessment embedded in an artifact. The blade asks, "Are you willing to do this?" And then it waits to see who says yes. Fact 80. Nocturnal, the Prince of Night and Luck, holds a different relationship with the Thieves Guild than most patrons hold with their followers. She entered into a pact with the guild generations ago, providing supernatural luck in exchange for devotion. The Skeleton Key, her artifact, kept the guild prosperous for years until Mercer Frey stole it. Once the key left guild possession, their collective luck evaporated, and everything began going wrong. Restoring the key to Nocturnal's realm through the Twilight Sepulchre does not grant the player the artifact to keep. It is a sacrifice, returning something valuable to restore the divine favor it had been providing. Nocturnal's reciprocal arrangement demonstrates that Daedric princes can provide practical, ongoing benefits in exchange for service. She does not demand sacrifice or dramatic acts of evil. She demands devotion and the occasional morally flexible theft. In exchange, she makes the impossible merely difficult. Section 8. Hidden People, NPCs with secret stories. Skyrim's population of named characters is much more densely layered than a casual playthrough reveals. Most of the people you walk past or briefly interact with carry entire histories inside them, and some of the most important details about who they are and what they represent are things they never directly tell you. Fact 81. Sibyl Stentor, the Court of Wizard in Solitude's Blue Palace, is a vampire who has been advising the Jarls of Solitude for over a century. She has witnessed Solitude's entire modern political history across the reigns of multiple rulers. Most court members either know or suspect her nature, but tolerate it because her knowledge, accumulated over lifetimes of mortal observation, is simply too valuable to lose. She is not malevolent in any active sense. She feeds ethically, taking small amounts from willing donors in exchange for favors or protection. Her presence represents an unusual category of vampire, one who chose to integrate into mortal society and use immortality for something other than predation. Fact 82. The Radiant AI system that governs NPC behavior in Skyrim was developed from a napkin drawing. Bethesda game director Todd Howard sketched out the concept on a literal napkin at some point during development, drawing the player character at the center with various icons representing game elements connected to them by lines. He handed this to lead designer Bruce Nesmith, who later described the moment as one of the most genuinely creative experiences of his career. The team built the entire behavioral framework for every NPC in the game from that initial sketch, creating a system where characters have schedules, needs, preferences, and dynamic responses to events in the world around them. Fact 83. Heimskr, the man shouting about Talos in Whiterun's marketplace, was not always a street preacher. Before the White Gold Concordat banned Talos worship, he was a respected scholar whose academic research focused on Nordic theology. When the ban took effect, his careful analysis led him to conclude that the metaphysical and theological consequences of outlawing Talos worship would extend far beyond the political realm. He began preaching publicly as a form of academic activism, believing that education could overcome political suppression. Years of being ignored, mocked, threatened with arrest, and dismissed drove him to increasingly extreme rhetoric. His sermons grew louder and more destabilized, not because he went mad, but because measured academic arguments failed to move anyone. He is a scholar whose expertise became legally dangerous, and who responded by turning the volume up further and further in the hope that someone would eventually listen. Fact 84. Maik the Liar appears across multiple Elder Scrolls games and serves as Bethesda's self-insertion into their own work, a Khajiit character who exists in a strange space between fictional inhabitant of the world and developer commentary on the game itself. His dialogue references features removed from previous Elder Scrolls titles, comments on common bugs, acknowledges fan complaints, and delivers humorous observations about mechanics that no character within the fiction should have any awareness of. When Maik mentions never finding calipers, he is referencing the removal of calipers as collectible miscellaneous items. When he comments on dragons flying backward, he is acknowledging a well-known bug. His name, Maik the Liar, provides plausible deniability for everything he says, while simultaneously ensuring that players who understand the meta-joke know exactly what he is. Nothing he says must be true, which paradoxically means all of it could be true. Fact 85. Esbern, the old man hiding in the Ratway beneath Riften, survived the Thalmor's systematic extermination of the Blades following the Great War, through caution that bordered on obsession. He watched his entire order die, or go into hiding, while staying one step ahead of agents who were genuinely trying to kill him. His paranoia when the player first finds him is not a psychological defect. It is 30 years of justified vigilance that kept him alive when everyone else in his organization was captured and killed. He is the last living repository of the Blade's accumulated knowledge about dragons, including information that would be completely lost forever if he were killed. His seemingly unhinged behavior in that dark corner of the Ratway is the product of very good reasons, kept for a very long time. Fact 86. The College of Winterhold actually holds lectures. This is a detail many players miss because it requires being in the right place at the right time. Between 1 and 3 in the afternoon each game day, the Master Mages hold classes in their areas of specialty within the college. If a dragon attacks or another major threat emerges, the lectures are canceled for 24 hours before the schedule resumes. The level of behavioral detail this represents, actual scheduled academic programming that responds dynamically to emergencies and then returns to routine, is Bethesda demonstrating that the college is a functioning institution of learning rather than simply a quest hub that players pass through. Fact 87. The Augur of Dunlane, the strange magical entity that lives in a sealed chamber beneath the college and acts as an oracle, was once a human student named Dunlane. His curiosity led him to experiment with magical forces beyond his preparation, and a catastrophic accident transformed him into pure magical energy. He retains awareness and the ability to communicate, but exists without physical form, confined to a specific location, simultaneously a resource and a warning. The college maintains his chamber partly for the genuine utility of his divination abilities, and partly as an ongoing institutional reminder that magical ambition without wisdom creates consequences that cannot be undone. Fact 88. Maven Blackbriar controls Riften in every way that actually matters, while the Jarl governs it in name only. She owns the meadery that employs a significant portion of the city's population. She has established relationships with the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood. She has leverage on virtually every important political figure in the city, including the Jarl's own steward. She operates through a combination of blackmail, economic control, strategic violence, and information networks so thorough that anyone who might consider opposing her already knows that doing so would be catastrophically self-destructive. If the Imperials win the Civil War, Maven becomes Jarl of Riften, finally adding the formal title of official authority to the overwhelming unofficial authority she has exercised for years. Her elevation simply makes visible what was always true. Fact 89. The Khajiit caravans that set up camp outside Skyrim's major cities, rather than being allowed inside the walls, are not simply traveling merchants. They serve as intelligence networks for Elswehr's leadership, moving freely between holds, observing everything, and reporting political developments, military movements, and economic conditions to parties who are watching the civil war with careful interest. Some caravans also distribute skooma, using addiction as leverage to cultivate informants among Skyrim's population. The Khajiit have their own agenda, and the commercial activity is cover for something considerably more sophisticated than trading pelts and jewelry. Fact 90. Goldir, a Nord warrior encountered in Hilgrun's tomb, has a genuinely moving character arc compressed into a short side quest. He follows you into his family tomb to stop a necromancer who is desecrating his ancestors' remains and using them against the living. If he survives the quest, he is available as a follower. But the detail that elevates this above a standard tomb-clearing mission is how seriously Goldir takes his obligation to his family. In Nordic culture, the treatment of ancestors' remains is a profound moral responsibility. The desecration of that tomb is not merely a problem to be solved. It is a violation of everything his culture says the living owe the dead, and his determination to address it despite obvious fear tells you everything about who he is. Section 9. The Civil War's hidden complexity. The Civil War in Skyrim is designed to have no correct answer. Both sides are right about some things. Both sides are wrong about significant things. And underneath both sides, operating with patient, multi-generational malice, is a third party that benefits from the conflict regardless of outcome. Most players pick a side based on surface-level presentation without engaging with the deeper political architecture, and they miss what is genuinely one of the most sophisticated political narratives in any open-world game. Fact 91. Ulfric's Stormcloak is classified in Thalmor intelligence documents, which can be found and read during the infiltration of the Thalmor embassy, as an unwitting asset of the Aldmeri Dominion. During his imprisonment following capture in the Great War, Thalmor interrogators broke him, and he provided information that aided their cause. He does not know this. He believes himself to be the Dominion's most sincere and committed enemy. This belief is precisely what makes him so useful to them. An enemy who is passionate, motivated, and genuinely committed to fighting the people who are manipulating him from behind the scenes is far more valuable than any paid agent. Fact 92. The Thalmor do not want either side to win the civil war. This is stated explicitly in the embassy documents, but most players miss it because they are focused on escaping rather than reading files. The Thalmor's ideal outcome is indefinite conflict. The longer the civil war continues, the more soldiers die on both sides, the more economic damage accumulates in Skyrim, and the less capable either the Empire or an independent Skyrim would be of mounting an effective resistance to the Aldmeri Dominion in a future confrontation. Every battle between Imperials and Stormcloaks is one fewer battle against the Thalmor. Every year of civil war is a year of preparation and strength building for the Dominion, paid for entirely by their enemies. Fact 93. Ulfric killed High King Torygg with the Thuum. This is both more and less controversial than the Imperial faction presents it. The duel was conducted according to ancient Nordic custom, which Torygg was honor-bound to accept. But Ulfric's use of the voice during combat, a shout that physically knocked Torygg off his feet and left him helpless before Ulfric finished him with a sword, violates the implicit understanding of what a duel of martial prowess is supposed to mean. From one perspective, using every available tool in a sanctioned combat is simply good tactics. From another, bringing a reality-altering supernatural power against an opponent with no way to counter it makes the entire concept of a fair test meaningless. The Civil War began not simply because Ulfric challenged the king, but because his methods raised questions that Nordic culture did not have a clean answer to. Fact 94. The Forsworn are not random bandits or foreign invaders. They are the indigenous people of the Reach, descended from the original Breton inhabitants who lived there before Nordic conquest. Their rebellion is an attempt to reclaim territory that was taken from their ancestors by force. During the Markarth incident, Ulfric's Stormcloak temporarily allowed Talos worship to resume in exchange for the Reachmen's help retaking the city. then broke this promise once the immediate military need had passed. This betrayal radicalized moderate reachmen into joining the violent Forsworn movement. Their guerrilla warfare against Nordic settlers is simultaneously terrorism and resistance, depending entirely on which historical claims you consider legitimate. The game presents them as enemies because the player encounters them attacking, but understanding their context produces a considerably more uncomfortable picture. Fact 95. The White Gold Concordat, the peace treaty that ended the Great War between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, was deliberately designed to be humiliating. The Thalmor knew that the treaty's terms, including the ban on Talos worship, would generate resentment among the imperial population, particularly in Skyrim. They wanted the treaty to breed rebellion. They wanted the anger to boil over. Every Nord who hates the Empire for signing the Concordat is behaving exactly as the Thalmor planned they would. The Concordat is not a compromise. It is a strategic provocation designed to produce precisely the internal conflict that the Stormcloak Rebellion represents. Fact 96. The Jagged Crown, the ancient artifact that both sides of the Civil War want to recover from its resting place, is significant not because it grants any practical power, but because of what it represents. The crown predates Skyrim's consolidation under a single High King. It comes from the Merethic era, when rival clans fought for dominance, and whoever possesses it can claim symbolic connection to ancient Nordic kingship that predates imperial involvement entirely. Both factions want it because they understand that legitimacy in war is not only material. The psychological impact of holding an artifact that represents the oldest form of Nordic authority is worth more than any direct military advantage. Fact 97. A Stormcloak victory, which many players choose because the rebels' independence rhetoric is more emotionally compelling than the Empire's pragmatic accommodation, actually results in Skyrim being weaker and more isolated when the inevitable second war with the Thalmor eventually comes. Ulfric's forces are exhausted from civil war. The province is economically damaged. The alliances with the rest of the Empire's territories are severed. An independent Skyrim stands alone against a dominion that has been strengthening itself during the entire conflict. The Imperial faction argues correctly that only a unified empire can sustain the resources and coordination necessary to defeat the Dominion in a second war. They are also correct that the current empire already compromised with the Thalmor in ways that fundamentally undermined Nordic religious freedom. Both positions are right in different ways, which is exactly the point. Fact 98. Windhelm, the oldest city in Skyrim and the city Ulfric governs, has an institutional racism problem that his rhetoric about Nordic freedom completely ignores. The Dunmer refugees in the Grey Quarter have been living in Skyrim for 200 years, since the Red Year of 4th Era 5, when Red Mountain's eruption devastated Morrowind. Multiple generations have been born in Skyrim and know no other home. The Argonians are not even permitted inside the city walls and must live on the docks. Ulfric speaks at length about freedom for Nords. He has nothing to say about the systematic oppression of non-Nords who have been living in his city since before many current Nordic families were established there. His silence on this is not an oversight. It is a choice. Section 10. Skyrim's hidden mechanics and technical secrets. Not everything hidden in Skyrim is lore. Some of the most interesting facts are about how the game itself was built, what technical and design decisions shaped the experience, and what invisible systems are operating underneath the surface of every session. Fact 99. Skyrim's in-game map is not a static image. When you open the map, you are looking at a real-time, three-dimensional rendering of the actual game world viewed from above. This means that visually dramatic actions taking place in the game world appear on the map. Absorbing a dragon's soul creates a visible orange glow. Major spell effects can sometimes be spotted from the map view. Weather effects show up on the map because the map is literally looking at the actual game environment from above, processed and displayed in real time. This also means the map shows the current time of day and the current lighting conditions, because it is genuinely looking at the world rather than displaying a pre-rendered image of it. Fact 100. There are hidden chests buried beneath every major city in the game containing the entire inventory of specific vendors. These chests exist outside the normal playable area, but can be accessed through various exploits. The most famous example is in Dawnstar, where walking between specific rocks near the Ironbreaker mine allows players to access the chest belonging to the Khajiit caravan merchants by navigating the geometry. This design choice reveals something genuinely interesting about how Bethesda handles NPC inventories. Rather than storing them as abstract data, vendor items physically exist as objects in actual containers in the world, technically accessible if you know where to look. It is an unintentional window into the nuts and bolts of how the game's economy functions at the code level. Fact 101. Skyrim contains 337 readable books, containing a combined total of approximately 316,000 words. For context, The Fellowship of the Ring, the first volume of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, contains approximately 177,000 words. Skyrim's in-game library represents roughly 1 3/4 Lord of the Rings books of text, written by actual hired authors who treated the world-building work with the seriousness of genuine fiction. A player could theoretically complete an entire Skyrim playthrough without fighting a single battle, simply reading books, and they would finish with more reading material than most novels provide. Fact 102. The dragon language, Dova-Zul, was developed as a functional linguistic system, not just a collection of sounds. Every word on every word wall means something specific. The Dragonborn theme song's opening lyrics, Dova Keen, Naal Ok Zin La Vahrin, translate to Dragonborn, Dragonborn, by his honor is sworn. The language has its own grammar, its own vocabulary, and its own visual script designed from the ground up, based on Todd Howard's request that it look like something a dragon could carve with its claws into stone. The angular, sharp visual system that resulted is not decorative. It is a complete writing system that encodes actual meaning. Fact 103. The main theme of Skyrim, the Dragonborn theme with its choral opening, was recorded with a 30-piece choir that composer Jeremy Soule layered 3 times to create the effect of 90 voices. Todd Howard had originally described what he wanted as the Elder Scrolls theme, as sung by a barbarian choir. The lyricist Emil Pogliarulo wrote the words in Dova-Zul specifically, grounding the player's identity as Dragonborn in the music from the first moment the game launches. The result became one of the most recognized pieces of video game music ever composed, with a cultural footprint large enough that Skyrim is now, for many people, inseparable from that opening sound. Fact 104. Bethesda built a dedicated level design team for Skyrim, specifically because Oblivion had received significant criticism for its dungeons, many of which reused tile sets and layouts in ways that made them feel repetitive and interchangeable. For Skyrim, the team went above and beyond to ensure uniqueness. The estimates for the number of distinct dungeon areas in the game range between 300 and 315, and even the development team itself is not entirely certain of the exact number, because it grew organically during production, beyond the ability of any individual to track. Fact 105. The creation engine, the technology Skyrim runs on, was built for the game specifically and represented Bethesda's first significant departure from the Gamebryo engine that had powered Morrowind, Oblivion, and many Fallout games. The creation engine used Gamebryo as an inspiration and starting point, but rebuilt significant systems from scratch, particularly the animation system and the environmental rendering. This shift was part of why Skyrim felt visually and mechanically distinct from its predecessors, while maintaining the open-world, emergent gameplay philosophy that defines Bethesda's approach. Fact 106. The Shadowmark system used by the Thieves Guild is fully functional throughout Skyrim. Subtle symbols carved near buildings and significant locations communicate information between guild members in a visual language completely invisible to non-members. A shadow mark near a door might indicate a safe house, a location already robbed, a dangerous resident, a guard on a predictable schedule, or an escape route. Players who learn to read them gain information about every major city that the rest of the population is completely unaware exists. The marks appear on buildings across every major hold and some rural locations, demonstrating the guild's reach and the sophistication of their information sharing infrastructure. Fact 107. Skyrim's Radiant Quest system, which generates procedural missions based on the player's current location and relationships with various factions, was designed to give the world an infinite supply of content, but it also creates emergent storytelling that no developer scripted. NPCs will ask you to clear dungeons you have already cleared, retrieve items from locations associated with factions you are friendly with, or investigate threats that lead you to places you have never been. The system is imperfect and generates some absurd situations, but its fundamental goal of making the world feel like it continues to have needs and problems, independent of the main quest line, creates a sense of a living world that was specifically intended to distinguish Skyrim from games where the world freezes until the player addresses it. Fact 108. The physics system in Skyrim applies to virtually every object in the game, including food items that were never intended to become projectiles. This is why wheels of cheese can be rolled down slopes, why FUSRO die can send platters flying across taverns, and why the gourds scattered throughout the game have developed their own legendary reputation for physics-based comedy. The gourds, incidentally, are modeled on real vegetables. Specifically, they are based on cushaw squash, a native fruit of Mexico used in traditional recipes. Bethesda's art team studied actual gourds to create the game's version, resulting in those odd, elongated shapes. The terrible physics those shapes interact with are, however, entirely Bethesda's own creation and entirely unintentional. Section 11. Easter eggs, memorials, and Bethesda's winks tucked into the corners of Skyrim, hidden in the highest places and the most remote corridors and the quietest moments between main quests, are the developers' love notes to the world outside the game. Tributes, jokes, acknowledgments, and memorials that reward players who look closely enough and know what they are looking at. Fact 109. The notched pickaxe sits at the absolute summit of the throat of the world, hidden at the highest accessible point in the game. It is a tribute to Marcus Persson, known as Notch, the creator of Minecraft. Both Skyrim and Minecraft released in 2011, making the timing perfect for a cross-industry acknowledgement. Bethesda and Mojang were involved in a legal dispute at the time over the word scrolls in Minecraft's then-intended title, which makes the gesture even more interesting. They were technically in a legal disagreement, and Bethesda still put a tribute to Notch at the top of their world. The pickaxe has reasonable combat stats, which means it has some practical value beyond the Easter egg, but its real significance is as a gesture of mutual respect between two studios that defined their respective genres in the same year. Fact 110. Eric the Slayer is a memorial. The character, encountered at Rorikstead as a farm boy who dreams of becoming an adventurer, is named after Eric West, a Skyrim fan who died of cancer before the game's release. His family contacted Bethesda and requested that the game include a character honoring him. Bethesda agreed and created Eric the Slayer, allowing players to help him pursue his dream by convincing his father and paying for his equipment, after which he becomes available as a follower. The fact that he is a non-essential character who can die permanently creates a painful layer of irony. The memorial character can himself be taken too soon, which some players find inappropriate and others find fitting. In either case, his presence in the game is a genuine act of kindness from a development team to a community member who never got to play. Fact 111. The Headless Horseman rides every night in Skyrim, and no one in the game acknowledges him or has any dialogue about him. He simply appears on various roads during nighttime hours, riding silently toward Hamvir's Rest, a burial site. Following him reveals nothing. He does not stop or interact. He does not explain himself. He is just a spectral figure on a horse, eternally completing a journey to a grave, serving no quest function and providing no lore context. His namelessness and purposelessness are entirely the point. Not every mystery needs to resolve. Not every ghost needs a backstory. Some things in Skyrim exist purely as atmosphere, reminders that the world contains more than the player-focused narrative, that there are stories happening in this world that are not yours to understand or complete. Fact 112. Somewhere in the game there is a potato in Pelagius' wing of the Blue Palace that strongly resembles GLaDOS from Valve's Portal series. This is not an official Easter egg in the sense of being deliberately hidden. It emerged from the game's procedural placement of objects and the fact that the potato's shape, in certain lighting conditions with certain rendering settings, creates a genuinely uncanny resemblance to a character from a different game entirely. Whether intentional or not, the community embraced it immediately, and it became part of Skyrim's cultural mythology. Fact 113. A cheese wheel in Dawnstar near Endin's residence is placed against a wall in a pattern that creates a Pac-Man reference, visible from overhead. The circular cheese wheel arranged near a corner gap, with smaller circular cheese pieces arranged in a line leading away from it, directly replicates the famous game screen. This is deliberate. Bethesda's team included multiple layered Easter eggs throughout the game, some of which require perspective shifts or specific camera angles to perceive correctly. Fact 114. Following the road southeast from Dragonbridge leads to an unmarked crime scene with no associated quest. A merchant couple and their horse have been killed. Environmental clues, specifically notes and tracks, lead the observant player to 2 additional locations and ultimately to the perpetrator. There is no quest marker, there is no journal entry, there is no official reward. The entire investigation exists purely for players who look at the world carefully enough to notice that something is wrong and care enough to follow the thread. This kind of unmarked environmental storytelling, complete scenes with beginnings, middles, and ends that exist independently of any quest system, is scattered throughout the game in ways that reward genuine exploration rather than waypoint chasing. Fact 115. The Frostflow Lighthouse on Skyrim's northern coast contains one of the most effective horror stories in the game, told entirely through journals and environmental details rather than dialogue or cutscenes. The lighthouse appears abandoned. Inside, a family's story unfolds through notes left by each member, each describing events from slightly different perspectives as a creature from below picked them off one by one. The final entry is from a child. The resolution of the story, discovered by fighting your way through what lies beneath, grants the sailor's repose ability, which makes healing spells more effective. The reward is minor, the story is not. Fact 116. Angi's camp, in the mountains south of Falkreath, contains an archery trainer whose personal history, if you read the notes scattered around her camp, involves both loss and deliberate withdrawal from society. She does not appear on any map marker. She offers archery training through a series of challenges and will give you her bow upon completion. The entire quest, including the backstory and the reward, exists without ever being flagged as a quest in the journal. Players who travel through the mountains south of Falkreath and never think to look for unmarked locations will never know she exists. Fact 117. The White Gold Tower in Cyrodiil is visible from Skyrim's map if you rotate it to look south. This is not an artistic representation or a simplified silhouette added for flavor. It is an actual simplified version of Oblivion's game world that exists within Skyrim's map space, visible through specific camera angles. Using console commands to disable the invisible borders that prevent travel south and walking in that direction reveals a crude but recognizable version of the Imperial City's iconic landmark. Skyrim and Cyrodiil exist in the same continuous world space. The borders are gameplay constraints, not geographical ones. Fact 118. Liar's Retreat, a cave located in the mountains southwest of Solitude, contains the Long Hammer, a unique orcish warhammer with no magical enchantment but a swing speed 30% faster than standard warhammers. The enhanced speed makes it deliver more damage per second than even a Daedric warhammer under most circumstances. Its previous owner, a man named Rod, died in circumstances told entirely through bloodstains, overturned furniture, and the bodies of everyone else who was in the cave when the Falmer attacked. The story is told in environment and corpse placement. Rod's body is on an altar with a Falmer sword through it. The Long Hammer is underneath, still waiting. Fact 119. There is a character in Skyrim's Dawnguard DLC named Gelibor's Way Shrines that many players complete without pausing to understand the full scope of what they are walking through. The Way Shrines of the Chantry of Oriel in the Forgotten Vale are not just puzzle elements for a quest. They are the stations of a religious pilgrimage that snow elves undertook as a path towards spiritual enlightenment. Walking through them in the correct sequence is the equivalent of completing an ancient ceremony that no one has performed in thousands of years. You are the first person in millennia to complete this pilgrimage, accompanied by the last living member of the civilization that created it. The weight of that, if you let yourself feel it, is considerable. Fact 120. The Sleeping Tree Camp near Whiterun shelters a giant and a peculiarly oversized tree whose sap is a potent narcotic. Closer examination of the tree reveals organic material unlike anything else in Skyrim's natural world, and the surface of the tree's trunk contains structural elements that look more engineered than grown. The The working theory supported by in-game evidence is that this is not a tree at all, but some kind of crashed alien organism from somewhere else in Aetherius or beyond, something that fell from the sky at some point and took root in Skyrim's soil. The giant who camps there is not protecting the tree so much as coexisting with it. A Khajiit merchant named Ulag is also nearby, specifically because the sap is commercially valuable as a skooma ingredient. Even potentially alien life forms get exploited for profit in Skyrim's economy. Section 12. The Last Secrets, Cosmology, Time, and the Dragonborn's Unknown Fate. We have traveled a very long way tonight, through the ash piles of a vanished civilization and the frozen halls of a forgotten paradise, through the philosophy of ancient dragons and the grief of the last surviving snow elf, through political conspiracies and the spiritual mathematics of the void. Now we come to the edges of what is known, the places where Skyrim's story brushes against something much larger, something the game itself can only gesture toward. Fact 121. The throat of the world is not simply Skyrim's tallest mountain, it is a temporal wound. When the ancient Nords banished Alduin using an Elder Scroll, they did not kill him. They displaced him through time, pushing him forward into an uncertain future moment. This act of time manipulation on a massive scale created a permanent metaphysical scar at the mountain's summit. Time functions differently there. Past, present, and future intersect at the peak in ways that do not apply to the rest of the world. This is why an Elder Scroll used in the ritual can still be found there, waiting thousands of years for someone to witness the original banishment through its magic. The summit of the throat of the world is a place where the moment of Alduin's banishment is still, in some sense, happening. Fact 122. The magical snow at the throat of the world's summit never melts. This is not weather. The perpetual frost at Skyrim's highest point is residual magical energy from the temporal wound created when Alduin was banished. The cold is a side effect of the most powerful time manipulation magic mortals have ever collectively performed, still radiating outward thousands of years after the event. This is why the Greybeards chose to build their monastery on the mountain slopes, rather than somewhere more comfortable. The magical cold focuses their meditation. It is a constant physical reminder of the Thu'um's true power, expressed in the only event that has ever proven sufficient to stop the World Eater. Fact 123. The Sigic Order, the organization of mages who appear during the College of Winterhold, quest to retrieve the Eye of Magnus, are the oldest magical organization in all of Tamriel. They predates the Mages Guild by such a margin that the Mages Guild's entire history appears as a relatively recent development by comparison. The Order studies magic at its most fundamental level, seeking understanding rather than power. They live on the island of Artium, a place that occasionally removes itself from normal space-time entirely, becoming unreachable through conventional means. The Sigic Order's casual use of time magic during the college quest, freezing time and walking through stopped moments as if this is simply a convenient means of travel, says more about the gap between their capabilities and everything else in the game than any amount of direct description could. Fact 124. Alduin's Wall and Sky Haven Temple is exactly what it appears to be and more than most players realize. The Akaviri builders who constructed it after helping defeat Alduin the first time carved both a historical record and a prophecy into stone that survived thousands of years intact. Everything depicted on the wall happens during the main quest line. This is either remarkable prescience or evidence that certain events in Tamrielic history are genuinely fixed, predetermined by the structure of the Kalpic cycle. The wall depicts not just that someone will fight Alduin, but specific details of how the conflict will unfold. The Blades maintain their purpose for centuries without dragons and without a dragonborn, partly because this wall told them that both would return and that their order would be needed again when they did. Fact 125. The concept of mantling is one of the more philosophically unusual ideas in Elder Scrolls cosmology. It holds that if you imitate a divine being perfectly enough, thoroughly enough, convincingly enough, reality itself will eventually cease to distinguish between the original and the copy. You can, in theory, become the thing you are imitating by becoming it well enough that the universe accepts the substitution as valid. The most prominent example in Skyrim is Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness encountered in a quest involving the Mad Emperor Pelagius. The Sheogorath you meet is widely believed to be the hero of Kvatch from the events of Oblivion, who mantled the previous Sheogorath at the end of that game's Shivering Isles expansion. This would explain why this Sheogorath seems slightly more coherent and self-aware than typically depictions of the Prince of Madness, because he is, in some sense, a mortal who performed the role of madness so completely and so persistently that even cosmic forces accepted the performance as genuine. Fact 126. The Dragonborn's fate after the events of Skyrim and the Dragonborn DLC is deliberately and completely ambiguous. Unlike previous Elder Scrolls protagonists, whose fates are referenced in later games, the last Dragonborn disappears from historical documentation after saving the world from Alduin and then confronting Miraak. The Dragonborn DLC's ending hints at a connection to Hermaeus Mora, and some scholars of the lore interpret this as the Dragonborn entering Apocrypha's service permanently, trapped in endless reading in the Infinite Library. Others believe the Dragonborn broke free and lived an ordinary life. The most optimistic readings suggest they became an eternal champion, dormant until needed. The ambiguity is intentional. It is a story that belongs to the player, and Bethesda chose not to write the ending for it. Fact 127. The Kalpic cycle means that Alduin's defeat in Skyrim is not a permanent resolution. At the end of the current age, when this world reaches its natural conclusion, the World Eater must perform his function. Without Alduin, without the mechanism of ending, the current Kalpa cannot conclude, and a new one cannot begin. The Dragonborn stops Alduin from imposing premature dominion over mortals, but does not change the fundamental structure of existence. Alduin will return, the world will end, a new world will begin. The victory in Skyrim is not cosmic, it is temporary, it is human scale. It matters immensely within the span of mortal lives and means almost nothing in the context of deep time. This is not nihilism. It is the Elder Scrolls being honest about scale. Fact 128. The Elder Scrolls themselves, the artifacts that give the series its name and which appear throughout Skyrim as objects of tremendous magical and prophetic significance, are not created by anyone. They have no known origin. They exist prior to the current world and will presumably exist after it ends. Each scroll contains a fragment of all possible futures simultaneously, and reading one allows the reader to perceive specific events at the cost of temporary or permanent blindness. The scrolls do not contain prophecy in the simple sense of predicting a fixed future. They contain all futures, overlapping and contradictory, and the act of reading focuses them on one thread, one possible path through the chaos of what might be. The moth priests who dedicate their lives to reading the scrolls always end up blind, but they describe what they perceive during reading as indescribably beautiful, the full texture of time visible all at once before the light goes out entirely. Fact 129. The Amulet of Kings, whose destruction by Martin Septim at the end of the Oblivion Crisis changed the relationship between Mundus and Oblivion permanently, represents the moment the Empire lost its metaphysical legitimacy. Martin's sacrifice created a permanent barrier that prevents full Daedric manifestation in Tamriel, but it destroyed the magical covenant that had given Septim emperors their divine mandate. Titus Medes' dynasty, the imperial family that rules during Skyrim's events, possesses only secular political authority. The magical legitimacy that made previous emperors unquestionably supreme is gone. This explains some of the Empire's weakness during Skyrim's era. They govern through administrative competence and military force, not through divine right in any meaningful sense. Fact 130. The Soul Cairn, the realm you visit in Dawnguard to retrieve Arvak and assist Serana's mother, is one of Tamriel's most theologically disturbing locations. Every mortal whose soul is trapped in a soul gem and used for enchanting ends up there. This includes every leveled enemy you have ever killed with a soul-trapping weapon. The endless purple wasteland you walk through is populated by shades of people who committed no crime except being killed by someone with a soul trap spell at the moment of their death. This means that the common, completely mundane practice of using filled soul gems for enchanting condemns the trapped individuals to an eternity in this desolate realm. The casual moral horror of this is left entirely to the player to process without any NPC ever commenting on it. Fact 131. The Reaper in the Soul Cairn is a hidden boss that most players miss entirely. He can only be summoned by finding 3 Reaper gem fragments scattered throughout the Soul Cairn and placing them on a specific altar. The Reaper appears to be the warden of this afterlife prison, an entity whose specific function is ensuring that trapped souls stay trapped. His existence raises questions that the game does not answer about who created him, what authority he serves, and whether the Soul Cairn's structure as a prison was designed or emerged from the nature of Daedric reality. He is not just a difficult fight. He is evidence that the Soul Cairn has intentional architecture, that it was built to contain rather than simply grown from the accumulation of trapped souls. Fact 132. Solstheim was once part of Skyrim. The island visible from the northeastern coast of the province was connected to the mainland until the battle between dragon priest Mirak and the priest Vachlok tore it loose. Their confrontation lasted days, neither willing to yield, and their clash was so catastrophically powerful in magical terms that it literally reshaped geography. When Valak finally won, Solstheim had become an island. The permanent geographic alteration proves that conflicts between sufficiently powerful practitioners do not merely affect people, they rewrite the physical world. The strait separating Solstheim from Skyrim is a battle scar, a permanent mark on the landscape from a fight that happened at the dawn of the Dragon Cult era. Fact 133. The Greybeards do not age in any normal sense. Masters of the Thu'um at the level the Greybeards have achieved can extend their lifespans dramatically beyond normal human limits through proper meditation and discipline. The Greybeards living at High Hrothgar have been there for decades, possibly centuries. Their aging slowed so dramatically by their mastery of the voice that they accumulate centuries of experience while physically aging at a fraction of the normal rate. This explains how the institution maintains consistent philosophical and technical knowledge across what should be multiple generations. They are not passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Some of them are simply still there, having been there long enough to remember multiple eras firsthand. Fact 134. The Dragon Cult's final stand at Forelhost High in the Jural Mountains in the year 1 era 139 is one of the quietest tragedies in Skyrim's history. When King Harold's forces tracked down the last significant concentration of Dragon Cult loyalists to this secluded mountain monastery, they arrived to find everyone already dead. The dragon priest Ragot had led his followers in collective suicide, drinking poison rather than facing capture or forced renunciation of their faith. They died according to their own terms and in their own time, denying their enemies the satisfaction of conquest. The Dragon Cult ended not in battle, but in a mountain monastery where true believers chose death over watching their religion be officially extinguished. It is a strange and melancholy end for an institution that had once ruled all of Skyrim. Fact 135. There is a mournful giant standing vigil over a dead mammoth near Broken Tower Redoubt. He will not attack unless you attack first. He is simply grieving. This detail, quiet and easily missed, speaks to one of the most underappreciated aspects of Skyrim's world-building. Giants are not monsters. They are semi-nomadic herders who maintain deep, long-standing bonds with their mammoth companions and who become aggressive only when their herds or their territory are threatened. This particular giant has lost his companion and is spending what may be weeks or months simply standing nearby, circling back periodically, unable or unwilling to leave the place where his friend died. Players who kill him for his loot are committing murder against someone in profound grief, and the game trusts you to understand that without telling you. Fact 136. The companions reject political power specifically. They are legendary warriors respected throughout Skyrim, and in a world torn by civil war, their support would mean something real to either side. They decline to give it. Their neutrality is not apathy or cowardice. It is intentional policy dating back to their founding. The companions serve Skyrim itself in an abstract sense, not whatever government happens to be claiming authority at any given moment. This philosophy allows them to take contracts from anyone without political complications and ensures they survive regardless of who wins the war. A companion might fight for the Empire one day and for the Stormcloaks the next, depending on who contracted them. Their loyalty is to clients and to the institution's values, not to causes or ideologies. Fact 137. Delphine's paranoia, which makes her difficult and demanding and exhausting to deal with throughout the main quest, is entirely rational given her history. The Thalmor systematically hunted and executed every blade they could find after the Great War. She watched her order destroyed. She spent decades in hiding in a village, maintaining a false identity as an innkeeper, staying one step ahead of agents whose only purpose was to kill her. Her aggressive, suspicious, trust-no-one approach to every interaction is the practical outcome of 30 years of justified fear. She kept herself alive when almost everyone else in her organization did not. Her methods might be frustrating in the safety of a main quest interaction, but they are the product of experience that the player has not shared and cannot fully appreciate without knowing her history. Fact 138. Kodlak's funeral, if you have completed the companion's questline properly before the final quest, includes a moment where his shade appears in Sovngarde. He made it. After everything, after decades of fearing that the beast blood had barred him from the afterlife he spent his life trying to deserve, Kodlak Whitemane stands in Shore's Hall with every other Nord who ever died well. This single visual confirmation, available only if you completed his personal quest to cleanse his soul before attending the final confrontation in the main quest, is one of the most genuinely emotional rewards Bethesda hid in the game. It costs nothing. It adds no power. It simply confirms that the good man got the ending the good man earned. Fact 139. The stars and celestial bodies visible from Skyrim each correspond to constellation signs in the game's standing stone system. The 13 standing stones scattered across the province each represent one of the 13 constellations of Tamrielic astrology, which are understood not as distant stellar phenomena, but as direct expressions of divine influence bleeding through the holes Magnus and the Magna Ga made when they fled creation. Activating a standing stone aligns the player with one of these influences, granting abilities that reflect the nature of that particular stellar wound. The Lover's Stone, the Tower Stone, the Lord's Stone, each one is a direct connection to a specific divine presence leaking through the sky. Fact 140. Akatosh and Auriel are the same being. This is one of the more philosophically significant theological facts in the game's lore. The Imperial Akatosh and the Altmeri Auriel are cultural interpretations of the same fundamental divine entity. When Empress Alessia established the 8 divines, she created a religious synthesis combining human and elven deities to unify her empire. Akatosh was born from this merger, drawing from both the existing Nordic imperial time deity and Auriel, the elven ancestor god. The theological truth the game circles around without fully stating is that divinity transcends cultural categorization. The same cosmic principle, the one that established linear time, the one that anchors reality in sequential causality, manifests differently to different cultures based on their needs and their conceptual frameworks. Different names, different mythologies, same god. Fact 141. The Thu'um can do far more than combat. This is something Jurgen Windcaller understood deeply, and the Greybeards maintain as institutional knowledge, but which the game's quest structure barely touches. Ancient Nordic culture used shouts for construction, agriculture, healing, communication, and artistic expression. Master tongues could reshape landscapes, calm storms, accelerate the growth of crops, or project their voices across vast distances to be heard clearly. The reduction of the Thu'um to primarily combat applications, which is essentially all the player ever does with it, represents a cultural decline from a much more versatile tradition. The Way of the Voice attempts to preserve the broader understanding. Most of what is lost is gone completely, known only through references in the game's most obscure texts. Fact 142. The Ugma Infinium, Hermaeus Mora's gift of instant knowledge, destroys its reader in a specific way. The book allows a person to instantly master entire skill trees, absorbing decades of learning in moments. But this knowledge does not integrate naturally. It is forcibly implanted, overriding existing neural and spiritual pathways to make room for new information. Reading the Infinium fundamentally changes who a person is at a deep level, destroying their previous self to create something new that possesses the knowledge but is not quite the same individual that sat down with the book. It can only be read once, not because it is consumed, but because it transforms the reader so completely that the person who would read it a second time no longer exists. Fact 143. The companion started as what is, by any honest assessment, an extermination force. Ysgramor returned from Atmora after the Night of Tears with warriors specifically recruited to ensure the complete destruction of Snow Elf civilization. The 500 companions were not settlers who happened to be warriors. They were warriors whose explicit purpose was genocide. The organization has evolved enormously over 5,000 years, abandoning its explicitly racial founding mission to become a more neutral professional order that takes contracts without political alignment. But the knowledge that even Skyrim's most respected institution began as something that would be considered a war crime by any modern ethical framework adds considerable complexity to every interaction with the organization. Fact 144. The Gildergreen in Whiterun's Wind District, the dead tree standing at the center of the city's religious life, did not die of disease or old age or neglect. It was killed by devotion. For centuries, worshippers carved their prayers into its bark, individual marks that each meant nothing but collectively accumulated into fatal damage. The tree was literally loved to death by generations of believers who could not imagine that their small personal contributions to a shared tradition could destroy the thing they were trying to honor. The quest to replace it, which involves choosing between harvesting a branch from the ancient elder Gleam or convincing its guardian to give a sapling, includes an implicit question about whether the replacement will meet the same end, whether the pattern will repeat, whether devotion and destruction are always the same act when multiplied across enough believers and enough time. Fact 145. There are multiple strains of the Dragonborn power, in the sense that the gift has manifested in different individuals with slightly different strengths and characteristics throughout history. The common thread is the ability to absorb dragon souls, the innate understanding of the Thu'um that allows shouting without the decades of meditation normally required, and some degree of divine mandate in the sense of appearing at moments of historical crisis. But the specific expression of the power, how it manifests and what it enables beyond the basics, varies between individual Dragonborns in ways that the ancient texts hint at without fully explaining. The player character is the last known Dragonborn, but not the only one ever. Fact 146. Nocturnal's Twilight Sepulchre, the location where the Thieves' Guild quest line culminates, exists as a permanent conduit between Mundus and Oblivion. It does not open periodically or operate on a schedule. It is simply open, all the time, a stable connection between the mortal world and the Evergloam, Nocturnal's realm of eternal night. The nightingales who serve as its guardians do so not just in life, but after death, because their pact with Nocturnal extends beyond mortality. They guard the conduit for eternity. This means that every nightingale who ever completed the ceremony and then died is still there, in some form, maintaining their post in Nocturnal's service. The afterlife of a nightingale is not Sovngarde or any other conventional destination. It is standing guard in a dark temple forever, which is either honor or tragedy, depending on perspective. Fact 147. The Dwemer made clothing. This seems like an obvious point, but it has interesting implications. We know they ate food, wore clothes, slept in beds. The evidence from the ash piles in Bom's Amshend shows them as a civilization living ordinary domestic lives alongside their extraordinary technical achievements. The contrast between their mundane human needs and the truly inhuman scale of their engineering creates a poignant image. These were not alien beings who wanted nothing and needed nothing. They were people who required the same basic things any person requires. They cooked meals. They slept. They presumably talked to each other about ordinary things when they were not redesigning reality through sound. What they were building was extraordinary. That they were doing it from a foundation of ordinary life makes their disappearance more, rather than less, affecting. Fact 148. The Ebony Warrior, who appears at level 80 to request an honorable death in combat, belongs to a specific cultural tradition of seeking a worthy end. Nordic culture places enormous value not just on how you live, but on how you die. Dying in battle against a worthy opponent is considered the ideal death, granting access to Sovngarde and all its rewards. The Ebony Warrior is a Redguard, not a Nord, but he has adopted this philosophical framework. He is too skilled to be killed by ordinary enemies or random encounters. He has outlived his purpose in the normal progression of challenge and has come to find someone capable of giving him the death that his culture, adopted or otherwise, says will validate his life. Defeating him gives him exactly what he asked for, which is simultaneously a mercy and a violence, and somehow both at once. Fact 149. The game contains over 60,000 lines of recorded NPC dialogue, delivered by approximately 70 voice actors performing over 110 distinct roles. Among them is Christopher Plummer, who voiced Arngeir at the time he was in the process of winning a Best Supporting Actor Academy Award for his role in Beginners. The Skyrim performance and the Oscar performance were being delivered in the same period of his career. Two of the female voice actors, Linda Carter and Susan Eisenberg, had both played Wonder Woman at different points in their careers. Carter in the iconic 1970s television series, Eisenberg in the Justice League animated productions. Skyrim's voice cast is, on reflection, remarkable for a game released in 2011. Fact 150. The mountains that frame Skyrim's landscape are not just geography. Many of them mark the edges of ancient draconic territories from the dragon cult era, boundaries that individual dragons held, and that the dragon priests who served them managed on their behalf. The entire province was once subdivided into dragon-held territories, administered through the Council of Priests at Bromjunar, and the natural features of the landscape served as the visible markers of those political boundaries. Walking through Skyrim's terrain is, in a sense, walking through a map of a political system that collapsed thousands of years ago. The mountains remember, even if no one walking among them does. Fact 151. Verona Nellis, a servant at Tel Mithrin in Solstheim who goes missing during one of the DLC quests, represents a pattern that appears throughout Skyrim's settlements. NPCs who are sent on errands or travel between locations can die in the world to random encounters, and that death actually happened to them. Verona was killed by ash spawn on the road, a creature that exists in a specific location, and her body can be found there. This is not staged. The ash spawn that killed her was not placed specifically for that quest. The game engine simply ran the simulation, and her character, following her scripted route, encountered a threat she could not survive. Bethesda's world simulation worked exactly as intended and produced an emergent tragedy that the game then acknowledged as genuinely having happened. Fact 152. The Baranziah stones, 24 gemstones of the Crown of Baranziah scattered across every major dungeon and city in Skyrim, represent one of the game's longest optional quest lines and one of its most demanding collection challenges. The reward, the Prowler's Profit perk, that dramatically increases the chance of finding gemstones in containers and on enemies, is disproportionately strong for a game that is not primarily about economic accumulation. But the questline's real purpose is forcing players who want the reward to explore a significant portion of the world's content that they might otherwise skip, visiting obscure locations and paying attention to environments that quick travel and waypoint chasing would allow them to bypass entirely. The stones are a mechanism for ensuring thorough engagement with the world. Fact 153. The Argonians' connection to the Hiss trees goes deeper than culture or religion. Argonians do not develop reproductive capability until they have ingested sap from a Hiss tree. Without access to these mystical trees, Argonian eggs will not survive. This biological dependency means Argonians are literally and not merely metaphorically connected to the Hist at a fundamental level. The Hist are ancient beings that predate most of Tamriel's races, possibly existing before the world took its current form. They communicate with Argonians through dreams and visions, guiding the species in ways that non-Argonians cannot perceive or understand. The Argonians are not simply a people who worship trees. They are a people who are biologically, reproductively, and spiritually incomplete without them. Fact 154. The lusty Argonian maid appears more times and in more varied locations throughout Skyrim than almost any other book in the game. Bandit camps, noble houses, college dormitories, the rooms of guards, inns throughout the province. Its ubiquity is both a recurring joke and, if you consider it seriously for a moment, a piece of actual cultural commentary. The book's author, Crassius Curio, was a character in Morrowind known for his particular literary interests. His work surviving into the Fourth Era, as popular literature read at every level of society, says something about how certain kinds of content transcend time, class, and cultural shift to achieve a kind of immortality that more formally serious work sometimes does not. Fact 155. Alduin's ability to resurrect dragons from burial mounds is, from a strategic perspective, precisely what the Dragonborn's soul-absorbing power counters. Alduin can reconstitute a dragon from bones, presumably as long as the soul is available to return to the body. When the Dragonborn absorbs that soul, it is not merely stored, it becomes part of them. Alduin cannot call back what has been absorbed. Every word of power the Dragonborn learns, every Thu'um shout they master, is built from the accumulated knowledge of dragons whose souls now live inside them. The Dragonborn is not just fighting Alduin, they are becoming something partly made of the army Alduin is trying to rebuild. Fact 156. The Dark Brotherhood's presence in Skyrim during the events of the game represents the organization operating at significantly reduced capacity following a catastrophic period in Cyrodiil. The questline you participate in with Astrid's group is a faction in visible decline, smaller and less organized than the institution Cicero describes from his time in Cyrodiil. Astrid's eventual betrayal and the near-complete destruction of the sanctuary is not the Dark Brotherhood at its worst. It is the Dark Brotherhood, having already been deteriorating for years, running on nostalgia for its own former glory and failing to maintain the discipline that kept the original institution alive for centuries. Fact 157. The Companion's questline and the Dark Brotherhood questline are, in structural terms, mirror images of each other. Both involve the player character joining an ancient organization, rising through its ranks, dealing with an internal betrayal by someone in a position of leadership, and ultimately saving the institution from the consequences of that betrayal. Both feature charismatic, morally complicated authority figures whose personal history is the emotional heart of the questline. The Companion's Kodlak and the Dark Brotherhood's Astrid are almost deliberate contrasts. A man desperate to cleanse himself of corruption who was never given a real choice about accepting it, and a woman who chose corruption freely and eventually destroyed everything she claimed to value because of it. Fact 158. Skyrim's map is compressed to approximately 1/500th of the actual geographic scale it represents. Walking from Solitude to Riften takes maybe 30 minutes of game time at normal walking speed. In the fictional universe, this journey would represent weeks of hard travel across mountain passes, through bandit territories, around or through hold borders. The cities that appear in the game to have populations in the dozens actually represent settlements of thousands of people. When NPCs discuss traveling between cities as a significant journey requiring preparation, they are not exaggerating. They are describing actual travel in actual geographic space, and the ease with which the player moves between locations is entirely a gameplay abstraction that the game's fiction does not acknowledge. Fact 159. The Mages Guild that used to span all of Tamriel collapsed before Skyrim's events through a combination of corruption, infighting, and catastrophic magical accidents. The College of Winterhold is not a satellite campus of an ongoing institution. It is a fragment, all that remains of what was once a continent-spanning organization for the study and regulation of magic. And even this fragment is deeply unpopular with the population it exists near, because of the Great Collapse, an event in which much of Winterhold fell into the Sea of Ghosts, while the college remained standing and intact, leading locals to blame the mages for the destruction, regardless of whether any evidence supports this interpretation. The college exists in near total isolation, distrusted by its nearest neighbors, cut off from any broader magical community, and defended primarily by the fact that forcing it to close would be more trouble than leaving it alone. Section 13. The Architecture of Morality. Choices, consequences, and the world that notices. One of the quietest arguments Skyrim makes, embedded in its systems rather than spoken aloud in any dialogue tree, is that the world is watching, not in a punitive sense, not in the sense of a game that tracks every transgression and ensures you are punished for it, but in the sense that the things you choose to do leave marks on the world that the world does not pretend away. Some of these marks are mechanical, some are narrative, some are the simple, sobering experience of returning somewhere after a long absence and finding that what you left behind is still there, exactly as you left it. Fact 160. The game's economy does not reset around the player in the way many open-world games of its era do. If you drain a mine of all its ore veins, those veins stay empty for 30 game days before regenerating. If you clear a dungeon of all its enemies and loot, it stays cleared for 10 real-time days. If you kill a merchant, that merchant is gone. The world has memory, constrained and imperfect memory, but memory nonetheless. The accumulated effect of your actions in Skyrim is not cosmetic. The province you leave at the end of your playthrough is materially different from the one you entered, shaped by thousands of small decisions that no cutscene ever acknowledged, but that the simulation tracked and maintained. Fact 161. The guards throughout Skyrim have become famous for their dialogue, partly because it is repeated so often that players have memorized it, and partly because the underlying writing reflects a genuine attempt to make guards feel like people rather than props. The bandit and the knee arrow conversation is silly on its surface, but it represents something Bethesda did deliberately throughout the NPC voice work. Guards have opinions, preferences, concerns, and personal histories, even if those histories are delivered in fragments of overheard dialogue that accumulate into something like a character only if you listen across many interactions. The repetition is a technical limitation. The underlying intent was richness. Fact 162. Whiterun's social geography is one of the most carefully constructed in the game. The city is divided into 3 distinct districts, each reflecting a different social class and function. The Plains District at the bottom is the commercial and residential center. The Wind District in the middle hosts the Companions' headquarters and the Gildergreen. The Cloud District at the top is where Dragon's Reach, the Jarl's palace, sits, overlooking everything else. This is not accidental. It is a visual encoding of Skyrim's social hierarchy, with political power literally elevated above everything else. The warrior class below it, but above the common people, and the merchants and farmers at the base. You read this hierarchy every time you approach the city from the plains because it is built into the skyline. Fact 163. Markarth is built inside an ancient Dwemer city. The entire infrastructure of the Hold's westernmost major settlement sits on top of and incorporates a Dwemer ruin so vast that the current inhabitants have not fully explored it. The stonework visible throughout the city is Dwemer construction that has simply been inhabited rather than replaced. The mine at Sidna Mine goes directly into this ancient infrastructure. The forsworn prisoners who are sent there are mining through the remnants of a civilization that disappeared 3,000 years ago, using it as forced labor in a settlement built on top of another civilization's bones. Markarth has more layers of history per square foot than almost anywhere else in the game. Fact 164. The Companions' Underforge, the secret chamber beneath Jorvaskr, where the Circle performs their ceremonies involving the beast blood, is older than the mead hall built above it. The chamber was there first. Jorvaskr was built on top of it. This means that whoever established the Underforge and whatever was practiced there before the modern Companions existed were part of the original landscape of the site long before Isgramor's followers dragged their ship inland and built around it. The history of that chamber predates even the founding of the organization that currently uses it. Fact 165. Tolfdir, the elderly mage at the College of Winterhold, who serves as the primary teacher for new students, is one of the most technically senior mages in Skyrim, and possibly in all of Tamriel. His age, visible in every aspect of his characterization, from his shuffling walk to his gentle, repetitive lectures, represents decades of accumulated expertise. He is not a minor character. He is a profound master who simply does not perform his mastery for anyone. His patience with beginner students, his willingness to walk them through the basics of ward spells when he could be doing nearly anything else, reflects a specific philosophy about teaching that the game honors without comment. The most capable person in the room is often the quietest one. Fact 166. Lydia is a housecarl, not simply a follower. The distinction matters. A housecarl is a sworn defender bound by oath to protect the thane they serve. Lydia's famous line, "I am sworn to carry your burdens," is not sarcasm, though generations of players have treated it as such. She is describing her literal function. The institution of housecarls in Nordic culture represents a specific kind of personal loyalty and protective obligation that carries serious social and moral weight. When Lydia dies in combat because she was caught in an area effect spell you accidentally aimed at her, she dies fulfilling the exact role she swore to fulfill. She dies protecting you, even from your own incompetence. Fact 167. The Companion's questline, viewed from a distance, is structured around the question of what we owe to inherited obligations. Kodlak did not choose the beast blood. It was given to him as part of joining the Circle, presented as an honor that previous Circle members had accepted and that he was expected to accept. By the time he fully understood what the cost would be, he had already paid it. His entire arc is about trying to find a way to honor his obligations to the companions, while escaping the consequences of an obligation he never meaningfully consented to. This is a very specific kind of moral problem, one that most action-oriented games do not bother to engage with, and the fact that it sits at the center of the companion's questline is one of the main reasons that questline has more emotional weight than its relatively short length might suggest. Fact 168. The relationship between the Empire and the Thalmor is not simply one of an unwilling ally and a bullying patron. The White Gold Concordat represents a specific strategic calculation by both sides. The Empire, exhausted and territorially diminished by the Great War, accepted terms that were humiliating because the alternative was continued warfare that they were not sure they could sustain. The Thalmor accepted an imperfect peace because conquering the Empire entirely would have required resources they did not yet have. Both sides are playing a long game, waiting for the other to make a mistake or exhaust themselves, and the civil war in Skyrim is happening inside that broader strategic stalemate. The player, regardless of which side they support, is an actor within a conflict that extends far beyond Skyrim's borders and will outlast whatever happens to Alduin. Fact 169. Riften's canal architecture is unique in Skyrim. No other city is built around a network of waterways in the same way. The canals allow for movement of goods and, if you know how to use them, stealthy movement that bypasses the city's main streets entirely. The Thieves Guild's headquarters in the Ratway, directly below the city's streets, is connected to the canal system in ways that allow access to nearly any part of the city. This was not accidental. The city's geography was designed with the guild's needs factored in at some point in its history, or the guild chose Riften specifically because its geography was already suited to their operational requirements. Either way, the relationship between the city's architecture and its criminal underground is more intentional than it first appears. Fact 170. The Draugr that guard ancient Nordic tombs are not simply undead guardians created by magic. They are reanimated members of the dragon cult who are still fulfilling the duty they swore in life. The cult believed that Alduin would eventually return and resurrect the dragons in their burial mounds, and that faithful guardians should be present to welcome this return. They did not simply agree to be buried and reanimated. They chose to remain, in whatever form available to them, to maintain their posts through the centuries and millennia until their god came back. When you enter a Nordic tomb and wake Draugr from their resting positions, you are interrupting a vigil that some of them have been maintaining for thousands of years. They are not attacking you because they are mindlessly aggressive. They are attacking you because you are an intruder in a space they have been guarding since the First Era. Fact 171. The horse, Shadowmere, the Dark Brotherhood's gift to the player, has a regeneration rate so extreme that she is effectively immortal in combat. She can be killed in sufficiently extreme circumstances, but her health regenerates at a rate that makes this nearly impossible in normal gameplay. Shadowmere has appeared in previous Elder Scrolls games, making her either a supernatural entity that simply persists across eras or a name given to a lineage of extraordinarily capable horses. Either way, her recurring appearance across the franchise suggests the Dark Brotherhood has maintained a specific association with her for centuries, which implies either that she is genuinely the same horse or that the Brotherhood has been breeding for her specific qualities across multiple generations. Fact 172. The Daedric Prince Periite, the Taskmaster, governs the sphere of pestilence and natural order, but he is often overlooked compared to his more dramatically powerful counterparts. His realm, the Pits, is one of Oblivion's less visited and less discussed planes. But his quest in Skyrim, which involves a cult in the Reach who worshipped him to such a degree that they consumed a tainted incense and were left trapped between life and death, with their souls stranded in his realm, represents one of the more genuinely horrifying outcomes of Daedric worship in the game. The cult members are physically present but spiritually absent. Their bodies walk through a camp they can no longer meaningfully inhabit. They are alive enough to suffer and dead enough to be beyond conventional help. Fact 173. The Volkihar Castle in the Dawnguard DLC contains an entire internal social structure that functions whether or not the player interacts with it. Lord Harkon's court has hierarchies, alliances, rivalries, and grudges between individual vampires that predate the player's arrival by centuries. Vingalmo and Orthiolf, the two chief court advisors, genuinely dislike each other and are competing for influence. Harkon manages them by keeping them both slightly off balance. The Volkihar maintain civilization in the most deliberate sense, using elaborate social structures to manage the fact that they are all predators in a confined space who could turn on each other at any moment. Their sophistication is not incidental to their nature as vampires. It is the mechanism by which they survive each other. Fact 174. Winterhold's Great Collapse, the catastrophic event in which most of the city fell into the Sea of Ghosts while the college remained intact, happened in the Fourth Era year 122. The timing, shortly after the Red Year that devastated Morrowind and sent Dunmer refugees flooding into Skyrim, meant that tensions in the region were already high. The college's survival while the city died looked, to many survivors and their descendants, like the mages had saved themselves at the expense of everyone else. No evidence was ever found that the college caused the collapse, and multiple scholarly investigations found geological causes. None of this changed the belief of the people who lived with the ruins. Evidence rarely changes what grief has already decided to believe. Fact 175. The game's three major joinable factions, the Companions, the College of Winterhold, and the Thieves' Guild, each represent a different primary virtue that Nordic culture has complicated feelings about. The Companions represent martial excellence and physical strength, which Nords prize openly and without reservation. The College represents magical learning, which Nords find deeply suspicious and associate with elven influence. The Thieves' Guild represents cleverness and the ability to acquire things without earning them through honest labor, which is simultaneously admired in certain contexts and condemned in others. The fact that all three organizations exist and operate openly within Skyrim's social fabric, despite the different levels of official tolerance they receive, reflects a society with a more complex relationship to its own values than the surface-level warrior culture presentation might suggest. Fact 176. Serena, the vampire companion in Dawnguard, is one of the most technically sophisticated NPC companions in the game. She has more unique dialogue than almost any other follower, responds to more specific locations and situations with contextually appropriate comments, and has a personal history detailed enough that getting to know her feels like getting to know an actual person. Her relationship with her parents, her complicated feelings about her vampirism, her discomfort with bright sunlight even in moderate exposure, and her gradual adaptation to a world that has changed completely since she was sealed away centuries ago, are all handled with a kind of character care that the base game does not always achieve. She was written with the explicit intention of being a character the player could care about rather than simply use. Fact 177. The soul gems that power enchantments come in sizes corresponding to the relative spiritual significance of the souls they contain. Petty souls from small creatures, common and greater souls from larger animals and humanoids, grand souls from the most powerful beings. Black soul gems, which the Dark Brotherhood favors, can trap the souls of sentient beings, including humans and elves, which regular soul gems cannot. This is why using black soul gems for enchanting has different moral weight than using standard gems. The soul of a person is being extracted, imprisoned in a crystal, and burned as fuel for a weapon or a piece of clothing. The soul ends up in the soul cairn. The enchanted item that consumes the soul might be a necklace. That imbalance, the profound against the trivially mundane, is one of the game's most uncomfortable moral observations, delivered entirely through its crafting system, rather than through any explicit commentary. Fact 178. The path of the Dragonborn through Skyrim is, from a narrative perspective, an arc from an ordinary prisoner with no established identity to possibly the most consequential individual in Tamrielic history at this moment. But the game is careful not to make this feel grand from inside. The Dragonborn absorbs dragon souls and shouts things at their enemies and completes quests in a province that most of the world is not paying attention to. The stakes in Skyrim's main quest are genuinely cosmic, the fate of the current Kalpa, the survival of mortal civilization, but they are experienced in human scale, Standing in a snowy field while a dragon falls from the sky and you feel the soul enter you, and guards nearby shout something embarrassingly excited. The cosmic and the mundane sit right next to each other in Skyrim, and the game never tries to resolve the tension between them. It just lets both be true simultaneously. Fact 179. The College of Winterhold's Arcaneum, managed by Urag Groshub, contains every book the player donates to the collection, in addition to its starting inventory. This is a mechanical detail, but it has an interesting implication. The lore library at the center of Skyrim's premier magical institution grows based on what individual adventurers bring to it. The accumulation of knowledge in that building is, in a small way, something the player contributes to. Urag's protective attitude toward the collection, his genuine distress when books are damaged or mistreated, reflects a character who understands that information is irreplaceable in a way that most people do not. He is not guarding books. He is guarding the only copies of knowledge that exists in a world where civilizations disappear and their texts burn. Fact 179.5. The enchanting system, when examined through the lens of the game's lore, raises a question that the mechanics never force you to sit with, but which the lore absolutely supports. When you enchant a weapon with a soul from a grand soul gem, and that soul came from a bandit or a mage or an enemy spellcaster, where did that person's soul come from? They lived somewhere once. They may have had people who cared about them. The path from a living person to a soul in a gem to a bonus on a sword is one the game allows you to walk, mechanically. And the fact that it also provides the theological and cosmological context to understand what you are actually doing means the discomfort, if you feel it, is entirely intentional. Fact 180. The Throat of the World, at the summit, contains evidence of the original banishment of Alduin in the form of an elder scroll that has been sitting there since the ancient Nords performed the ritual thousands of years ago. The scroll is accessible to the player through the main quest. When you use it at the summit, you witness the past event that it records, watching the ancient Nord heroes banish Alduin to the future through sheer collective thuum and desperate sacrifice. You are seeing something that happened thousands of years ago, at the exact location where it happened, with an artifact that was present for it and has been waiting here ever since. The Throat of the World is not merely Skyrim's highest geographic point. It is the site of the most important event in the province's history, and every element of its unique character, the magical cold that never relents, the perpetual snow that will not melt, the way time seems to move differently at the summit than it does anywhere else in the world, is a direct consequence of that event still resonating through the place where it happened. When you stand at the top of Skyrim and feel the cold and see the snow and look out over the entire province laid out below you, you are standing in the wound left by the greatest act of collective heroism these mountains have ever witnessed. The wound is beautiful. Most wounds that matter are. Fact 160. The last thing this long and quiet journey through Skyrim's hidden world returns to is the fire, the one we started beside. Everything we have covered tonight, from the Dawn Era's unstable reality to the World Eater's final defeat, from the tragedy of the Snow Elves to the politics of the people who replaced them, from the philosophy of pacifism encoded in a mountain monastery to the theology of assassination encoded in a rotting corpse, all of it is part of one world. One enormous, contradictory, morally complex, breathtakingly detailed world that a team of roughly 30 to 40 people spent years building with the kind of attention to detail that rewards this kind of excavation. You can play Skyrim as a game about killing dragons and collecting better swords. Plenty of people do, and there is nothing wrong with that. But underneath the surface, if you go looking, there is a civilization's worth of thought waiting for you. Philosophy, history, tragedy. The occasional deeply weird joke involving a vegetable's physics. And now and then, if you are in the right place at the right time, a giant standing alone in a field, circling something that used to be alive, doing the only thing left available to him. That is Skyrim. Not the battles, not the level-up screens, the giant and his mammoth, and what it means that someone thought to put that scene there in the first place. Sleep well, cozy nights, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever the fire in your room looks like tonight. If this helped you drift a little quieter into the dark, please like this video and subscribe. Every subscriber is another person who finds their way here at the end of a long day, and that matters more than the number itself. A community of people who like things that are slow and deep and worth sitting with, that is something worth building carefully. And if there is a Skyrim secret you know that we did not cover tonight, something hidden and strange and waiting in a corner of that frozen world, leave it in the comments. Tell me about the unmarked grave you found on a hillside with a name carved into it that you could not find in any quest. Tell me about the guard who said something that made you stop walking. Tell me about the moment the world stopped being a game for a second and became something else. The lore never really ends. It just waits in the dark behind the fire, patient as stone, quiet as snow, ready for the next person who comes looking for it, with the lights low and the night outside doing whatever the night outside is doing, wherever you are right now.